The Passage to Hysteria. Part 2. The Mutineers. Matthew stood motionless, with his hands raised in the air, the sharp blade still pressed into his back, wielded by a mysterious individual. As he gazed at the endless earth before him, Matthew thought of how to best approach the situation. This was not some mindless beast trying to eat him, but a man who had also found himself stranded here. Matthew's eyes peered across the eerie void and black sky in the far distance, and decided that reason was his best approach. He cleared his throat, before gently approaching the man with conversation. "Look, I assure you that I am no threat to you." The mysterious blade wielder did not waste time and interjected. "That remains to be seen. I take it by your garb that you arrived fairly recently." Matthew nodded his head, then responded, "Yes, last night. I spent the entire night running from those disgusting creatures." The man fell silent. Then Matthew felt as the blade that was previously pressed against his back slowly lowered. Matthew began to cautiously turn around, with his hands still raised. When fully rotated, Matthew was presented with a tall man with long unwashed hair and a large unkempt beard. He wore what appeared to be medieval-era armor, but had clothing beneath it and shoes on from modern times. Beside him was a large worn-out brown potato sack, which was noticeably full with something. Despite his ragged hair and dirty face, the man had sapphire eyes that shined past it all. He had a puzzled expression on his face, as he questioned Matthew. "You saw creatures here in the meadow?" Matthew responded, and lowered his arms. "Yes, those hideous things chased me for miles all around here." The man's face depicted concern, as his gaze transferred to the ground. His hand combed through his beard, then he looked back at Matthew. "That's impossible. The horde have never traveled this far north, and have certainly never stepped foot in the meadow. You must be mistaken, stranger." Matthew sensed the man's confusion, and reiterated his statement. "No, these things looked like human beings, but mutated and with bones all bent out of shape. They were covered in some sort of pus." The man's widened as his worries were confirmed by Matthew's words. He let out a long and sorrowful sigh, and pressed his hand to his brow. After a moment of silence, the man raised his head and spoke. "We must tell Ezra at once. Come, we don't have much time. If what you just told me is true, then the horde could find the catacombs entrance any day now." The man began to usher Matthew forward, but he quickly interjected. "Whoa, hang on a second. Look, I have no idea what the fuck is going on here. But what I do know is that my daughter needs me. She was taken from me, and I need to find her." Matthew's sincere words and expression caused the man to pause and change his demeanor. He looked at Matthew with an increase of respect. "What is your name, stranger?" Matthew replied. "My name's Matthew Cooper." The man rubbed his hand across the armor plate across his chest, then extended it towards Matthew. "My name is Benjamin. It is good to make your acquaintance, Matthew Cooper. I am sorry for your misfortune. Come with me back to the catacombs and tell Ezra what you just told me. Then I give you my word that I will help you find your daughter." After a moment of hesitation, Matthew accepted Benjamin's gesture, and shook his hand with a firm grip. Benjamin's hand was large and full of rough calluses. He looked Benjamin deep in the eyes and spoke. "Don't give me your word if you can't keep it." Benjamin nodded his head in agreement, then released his grip on Matthew's hand. With that, Benjamin departed from the summit of the mountain, with Matthew behind him. The two men worked their way down the vast elevation of the natural mound. Matthew could notice the bizarre beauty of this place much more in the daylight. Though despite the night ending, the sky was still full of visible stars, and maintained its red and purple hue. The asteroids continued to rotate and glimmer above head, even more noticeable now. The blue grass seemed a touch lighter under the sun's light, and the red leaves of the white trees still pulsed with blue veins, though it was slightly diminished in the daylight. After some time of downhill trekking at a swift pace, Matthew began to tire. It was apparent that Benjamin was gifted with immense cardio, and was quite the athlete. The way he easily traversed the challenging landscape conveyed his heat and also his familiarity with the terrain. Matthew requested a quick rest, and Benjamin allowed it, but suggested that they keep it brief. Matthew squatted down and leaned his weight against a tree. Benjamin stayed standing and observed the land around him, ever observant of his surroundings. After catching his breath, Matthew asked Benjamin a question. "So what is this place? Are we on another planet or something?" Benjamin smiled for the first time since meeting Matthew. He placed his hands on his hips and looked at Matthew. "No, not exactly. I'll allow Mary to explain it to you in better detail. It's a bit complicated." Matthew felt a bit disappointed by Benjamin's response, as he desired to make sense of his surroundings. "Who is this Mary?" Benjamin pressed his hand upon a nearby tree. "Mary is the wise woman, the oldest of our remaining survivors. She is the keeper of the codex. As I said, she will do a better job of filling you in on all of this than I could." Matthew questioned on the codex. Matthew had a confused look on his face, as none of what Benjamin said made any sense to him. Benjamin sighed in what could be perceived as a tone of minor annoyance. The Codex is a collection of ancient texts from long before us, which catalogue all of the events that have taken place here. As Matthew digested the information, he decided to circle back to his original question, though he would word it somewhat differently. "And where is here? What is this place? Surely you can tell me something." Benjamin stared off into the distant forest for a moment, then walked away from the tree he had previously leaned upon. He paced around, then found himself in front of Matthew. He looked down at him, then responded. "This place has been known by many names over time, though we have come to call it Hysteria." Matthew's eyebrows raised, as he looked about his surroundings. He tried to ignore his plethora of bumps and bruises. He then asked Benjamin another question. "Due to the hysterical nature of this place, I assume, makes sense. So how did you find yourself in this hysteria?" As Benjamin inspected his beautifully sculpted blade, he responded passively. "The same way you found yourself here, I'm sure. You came across an eerie gateway, and ended up going through it. Maybe you were coerced, or maybe you were forced. Regardless, you are here now, and I'd suggest you get comfortable, because there is no way back." Concern spread across Matthew's face from the newfound information. He worried that if Anna was not in this odd place, then there was no way for him to reach her. He immediately requested more information on the matter. "So there is no way back to our world?" Benjamin shook his head no. "You're sure? I mean, this looks to be a pretty big place, lots of things out there. Surely if you can find yourself here, then there must be a way to get back." The desperate sound in Matthew's voice was very apparent to Benjamin as he attempted to console him. "Look, Matthew, like I said earlier, if your daughter is here, then I will gladly assist you in rescuing her. But as far as leaving Hysteria, I'm afraid that just isn't possible. I have been here for over a decade, and if there was a way to leave, then I think I would have found it by now." Though Matthew did not particularly enjoy the news, he did respect Benjamin's honesty and straightforward style. "Let's keep moving, we're a few hours out yet, and it'll be best to get this information to Ezra as soon as possible." Benjamin's request was followed, as Matthew achingly returned to his feet. The two continued their downhill journey through the Blue Meadow. After an hour or so of hiking, Benjamin broke the silence. "Did you happen to see any wildlife since you've arrived, other than the horde?" As Matthew painstakingly attempted to keep up with Benjamin's rigorous pace, he responded through bated breath. "Well, I did see what somewhat resembled a deer last night. But this one had thick fur and discolored antlers." Benjamin laughed at Matthew's words. "The very same deer I had been tracking for most of yesterday." He is quite elusive. Tell me, how did you manage to sneak up on the nimble creature? Matthew corrected Benjamin and clarified. I didn't sneak up on it. In fact, it walked towards me. It stared at me for a while, then took off into the woods. Benjamin pondered Matthew's words for some time. Interesting. Matthew wished to keep the conversation going, as the long silence only increased his overwhelmed state of worry. Conversation, at the very least, distracted him. There must be plenty of deer in such a lush and healthy forest. Why spend so much time on just one? Benjamin's somewhat carefree demeanor morphed into one of gloom. No, quite the contrary actually. Food resources have become quite scarce in recent years. We have a lot of mouths to feed, so when I come across a grand source of food, well, I will stop at nothing to procure it. After a brief pause, Benjamin added to his statement. Someone must provide for our people, and that responsibility has befallen my shoulders. I take the burden with a heavy heart, and I will not return empty-handed. As he said that, Benjamin raised the large brown sack over his shoulder. Matthew inquired about the inventory of the sack. Sir, I assume you have something for your people in the sack then? Benjamin nodded modestly, then responded. Just a few rabbits, I'm afraid. It'll get us by, but not for long. Winter's oppression is on its way. The travelers had finally reached the bottom of the never-ending decline, and were met with a flat grassy plain. The land was completely devoid of any curvature for miles. A few miles in front of them was the grand valley that Matthew had seen from the crest hours ago. Far beyond that was the ominous tear in the sky. The massive black void in the atmosphere resembled a hole in projector screen, where no light would dare venture. From the lower viewpoint, Matthew could more properly see the essence that flowed from the void down to the earth below. It met what Matthew could only deduce was a massive structure from the distance. The vibrant spirit danced its way down into the mysterious object. Perhaps it was another mountain, or maybe a man-made structure. Though from Matthew's immense distance, it was nothing more than a black blur. Benjamin snapped Matthew out of his mile-long gaze. Come on, Matthew, we're almost there. Matthew did not heed Benjamin's call, and he noticed. He turned back towards Matthew and waited patiently, knowing what he was about to ask. What is that, Benjamin, at the edge of my sight? Benjamin stared off at the distant anomaly with an intense fear in his eyes. That is death, and we can only keep it at bay for so long. Come on. Matthew, not satisfied by the answer, begrudgingly followed Benjamin. Onward Matthew followed Benjamin as they traveled around the base of the massive meadow. After some time of walking about the bottom of the forest's base, the two came across an utterly massive chunk of rock. Though this was no earthly stone, but that of the sky. Matthew peered upon a crashed asteroid that dug itself deep into the Earth's flesh. The monumental cosmic structure stretched on for hundreds of feet deep into the flat blue forest. The section closest to Matthew and Benjamin nestled itself deep into the hillside, like a knife cutting into the earth. Its body pulsed about with veins running all through it. Up close, Matthew could see just how astonishingly huge these veins were, as the neon blue passed through them. The luminous material caused Matthew to squint as it flashed by. My God, this is incredible. Matthew spoke with his eyes as wide as possible, and his jaw unhinged. The man was baffled by the sheer scale of this celestial titan before him. Benjamin did not look nearly as impressed, smiled at Matthew's excitement. No, Matthew, this is home. Follow me. Benjamin pushed forward towards the godly space rock, with Matthew right behind him. As they approached the asteroid, Matthew began to actually hear the sound of the pulsing material, as it passed by. It sounded so otherworldly and whisked by at an impressive rate of speed. The men had reached the colossal structure, and Benjamin came to a complete stop. Then he looked to his right, where about 20 feet away was a large rock. Benjamin approached the rock, and Matthew eagerly followed. Benjamin then hoisted himself up on top of the rock, which from Matthew's point of view seemed to rest up against the asteroid. It did not appear that there was any space between the two objects. Then, to Matthew's shock, Benjamin vanished behind the large stone. Matthew stood motionless, and at a loss for what to do. Benjamin. Matthew called out to his newfound colleague. After a moment of silence, Benjamin's head emerged from behind the rock. "Are you coming, Matthew, or would you rather stay out here with the horde? I'm sure they're getting quite hungry." A smile spread across Benjamin's face, as did Matthew's. He approached the rock, and carefully began to climb it. Once he had managed to reach the top of the stone, it all became clear to Matthew. Behind the stone was a hole drilled into the surface of the asteroid, about 5 feet wide. The rock, being at least 20 feet wide, concealed this little pathway very nicely. Benjamin rested about 10 feet below Matthew, on some carved steps. Behind him was a long, narrow and steep tunnel. "Watch your step, the first one can be a doozy." Benjamin offered his hand out as support for Matthew, as he carefully dropped into the hidden underpass. Matthew underestimated the distance, and crashed onto the floor at the moment of impact. Benjamin attempted to conceal his laughter, and helped Matthew back to his feet. After recovering from his fall, Matthew gazed down the ominous pathway. For the first 100 feet he saw nothing but black. Then way off in the distance was a single torch, which dimly illuminated the steep shaft. Benjamin nudged his head towards it, and entered the tunnel. It was very difficult to see anything except for the approaching torch. Matthew had his hand pressed against the wall of the tunnel for support, as he followed Benjamin downhill. After trekking downhill for nearly 100 feet, the two had reached the torch. Matthew could now see that the torch was placed not at the end of the tunnel, but at the beginning of a curve in the underground pathway. The angle of the corner was sharp and abrupt, which concealed all that would come after it. Before turning the corner, Benjamin turned back towards Matthew. "Watch your step, okay?" Matthew acknowledged Benjamin's words with a nod of his head. With that, Benjamin led Matthew around the corner past the torch. As the tunnel revealed itself to Matthew, he was in awe of what he saw. Beyond the concealed corner, the once narrow tunnel transformed into a massive and open spiraling staircase carved out of the earth. The soil beneath them was revealed to be a crimson red, the very same as the leaves that decorated the tree branches above. Matthew looked above him to see that the bottom of the colossal asteroid had been repurposed as the ceiling to this vast open catacomb. Its surface glimmered and reflected the blue essence that flowed through it. All throughout the walls of this underground pathway were the very same neon blue veins. They flowed all around Matthew, both above and below him. Matthew looked all around, then down to see the spiral continued downward for another 100 or more feet. Matthew now understood why Benjamin had cautioned him to watch his step earlier, for the drop-off to his left was a vast distance. Every 20 or so feet were colossal support beams that grew all the way to the base of the asteroid above. Down and down the men traveled, as Matthew continued to take in the beauty of his surroundings. The men had finally reached the bottom of the extensive decline tunnel. At the base was a flat land of about 50 feet, colored by the red soil. Torches were stationed sporadically about the space, which lit up the area. At the very end of the space was a small doorway. Benjamin approached the doorway, with Matthew in tow. The door appeared to be carved from the very asteroid that concealed this elaborately hidden space from above. It was nestled between the intersecting paths of the Earth's core. Benjamin then took his long sword, and proceeded to slam its pommel against the door 4 times. After a long pause, the sound of feet approaching feet from the other side killed the silence. The footsteps continued, until whomever it was stopped on the other side of the door. The mysterious person said nothing, then Benjamin spoke. "It is Benjamin, I return from my hunt. I bring a guest with me. A new arrival." As the words left his mouth, the footsteps returned, but this time they grew further from Matthew. Then the large door slowly began to creak open. Matthew could sense the immense weight of the door, as every inch of movement carried such force. Soon what laid behind the barrier began to come into sight. The sound of grunting and struggle became noticeable, and Benjamin stepped forward. Finally the door came to a halt, with it being left somewhat ajar. Matthew followed Benjamin as he entered through the doorway. As he passed through the opening, Matthew panned across a modestly sized room before him. The space seemed to act as a central hub, with several tunnel systems that spanned out in their own directions. Matthew looked to his right and saw a large man letting go of a rope that was attached to the door. The man was easily over 6 feet tall, and had to be nearly 300 pounds. He appeared to be in his mid to late 40s, and sported curly blonde hair and a large beard. His hair, like Benjamin's, was quite long, and was accompanied by a large bushy beard. Benjamin approached the man with his arms wide open for an embrace. "Carl, I have great news for you," said Benjamin with a joyful tone. "Do not tease me, Benny, you know I have been craving rabbit for months now." Carl, the large man, had a very noticeable Irish or possibly Scottish accent. Benjamin gestured to the large sack in his hand, and handed it to the strong man. Carl peeked inside of the bag, then looked at Benjamin with the joyful expression of a child. Carl dropped the bag and grabbed a hold of Benjamin, lifting him up and off of his feet with his ease. "Thank you, my friend. You know how good my rabbit stew is." Carl's booming voice filled the room with ease. As Carl continued to hug the helpless Benjamin, even Matthew felt a bit of joy from the sight. "Okay, easy, big fella. If you break my back, I won't be able to get any more rabbits." Benjamin jokingly teased the cheery brute. Carl placed Benjamin back on his feet, and turned his attention to Matthew. "And who is your guest here?" Carl began to approach Matthew, who stood still and felt somewhat intimidated. "This is Matthew, he just arrived last night," Benjamin informed Carl, who stood mere inches from Matthew. At this distance, many scars that populated Carl's giant arms became very apparent. He looked Matthew up and down, then extended his massive hand out. "Pleased to meet you, Matthew." Feeling relieved, Matthew mirrored the gesture, and responded, "It's good to make your acquaintance." Carl's hand completely eclipsed Matthew's, and the force of his grip was honestly scary. "It's a shame we have to meet in such a place, but consider yourself welcomed home." Carl's warm embrace was a relief for Matthew. Carl and Benjamin then slowly pushed the massive door back to its original position. "Well, I'll go prepare these rabbits for our feast." Carl spoke as he retrieved the sack of rabbits, and disappeared down one of the many tunnels. Matthew looked to Benjamin, who gestured for Matthew to follow him. "Come, I'll show you around." Matthew followed Benjamin down a pathway to their left. The parameters of the pathway was illuminated blue from the veins that ran through it, as they did all of the pathways. As they made their way down the path, Matthew began to hear the sound of distant chattering, which grew closer with each and every step. As they rounded a corner, another large space revealed itself. Populating this basketball court-sized area were dozens of people. They all congregated around several fire pits throughout the space, and rested upon carved furniture. The muffled sound of many voices converged together in the open room. Many people, all of which looked somewhat malnourished, conversed with one another. Some played with what appeared to be makeshift playing cards, whilst others seemed to be drawing. Then others simply lounged about, and did very little. We call this place the social hall. We all congregate here to chat or play games together. There isn't much to do here, so we spend much of our time here. Benjamin explained the scenery to Matthew, but did not stay for long. As he began to depart from the room, he turned back to Matthew. "I can introduce you around later, but there are more pressing matters at the moment." The two then walked across the social hall to another pathway. Another 50 or so feet, and the two emerged in a small two-way intersection. Left will take you back to the entrance, and right will take us to Ezra's personal quarters. Benjamin turned down the right path, which was at a slight incline. The two climbed up for around 50 feet, before reaching a flat plain once again. Matthew took a moment to catch his breath, gazing down at the vibrant red soil that made up the entire base of this underground village. After a brief pause, the two continued upward. Finally, the two reached a doorway, this one merely made of the white wood from the trees of the meadow. Benjamin gently knocked upon the door, this time with his hand instead of his sword. Then a voice responded. "Enter." The voice was deep and raspy, with a hint of age. Benjamin pushed the door open, revealing a cozy nook. At the end of this space, sat a man in a chair facing away from Matthew and Benjamin. Matthew could see a mixture of black and silver in the man's hair, which was contained in a bun. The man was inspecting a large piece of paper, sprawled across the table before him. He seemed quite enthralled by the parchment, as he aggressively studied its content. Benjamin began to approach the man, and spoke. "It is Benjamin. I have returned from my hunting trip, and bring—" Benjamin's sentence was halted by a raised index finger. The man gestured for Benjamin to pause, without taking his attention from the document before him. "Just a moment, Benjamin." The index finger lowered, as Benjamin sighed and looked to the ground. "Ezra, I bring vital information that is very time-sensitive." Benjamin's words caused Ezra's wandering head to come to a halt. His hands ceased their movement, and the parchment he had been studied was gently placed upon the table. Ezra then pushed his chair back, and rose to his feet. He then retrieved what Matthew identified as a makeshift cane from beside the large table. He then politely pushed the chair back under the table, and turned to face Benjamin and Matthew. Ezra's complexion was mixed, and a light brown shade. His hair, unlike the others, was short and groomed. It had a salt and pepper shade to it, with more gray than black. His brow was strong and led to an intimidating stare. As Ezra approached, it became obvious that the man had a slight limp, as he depended on the cane for support. Though he needed the assistance, he retained a strong, upright and dignified gait. He came to a stop some 5 feet from Matthew and Benjamin. After a brief moment of silence, Ezra spoke. "Well, what is this urgent news, Benjamin?" Ezra had an unimpressed and slightly annoyed look on his face. Benjamin gestured his hand towards Matthew. "This man's name is Matthew. He just arrived last night." Ezra greeted Matthew. "Welcome, Matthew." He shared a genuine smile with Matthew. Benjamin continued his point. "Matthew claims to have seen the horde, here in the meadow." Ezra smiled and nodded his head, with an expression that conveyed doubt. Benjamin attempted to cease this. "It is not a joke, Ezra." Despite his attempt, his leader did not seem convinced in the slightest. He quit his nodding, and looked back at the two men. "Benjamin, the horde have never traveled this far north. They refuse to. They find the healthy vegetation repulsive. It is what protects us from its influence, you know this." Benjamin did not hesitate to rebut Ezra's point. "Yes, I know this, Ezra, but you said it yourself that they have migrated further north in the last few years than ever before." Matthew described him to a T, down to the extra limbs. There is no way he could possibly know that, without seeing them. Ezra sighed, and looked Matthew up and down. His expression was no longer filled with laughter, but instead concern. "You are sure of this, Matthew? A great deal depends on this. I must have your word that what you claim is true." Matthew nervously swallowed, before addressing the tall and stoic man. "Last night I was chased by what you call the horde. They were horrid beasts that were infested with deformities, and were covered in this disgusting pus. They chased me for nearly an hour, before I managed to lose them." As Ezra heard Matthew's words, he raised his clenched fist to his lips. The man was clearly in a deep state of thought, as he fell silent for some time. Then he spoke, with a sense of dread in his eyes. "If this is true, then the relative peace we have experienced for generations could be coming to an end. This is a massive claim, one that I will need to look into myself before making any rash decisions." With these words, Ezra began to turn away from Benjamin and Matthew, and approached his table once again. Benjamin's eyes widened, as he hastily addressed the departing man. "Ezra, we do not have time to waste. If the horde have already entered the meadow, then they could sniff us out in no time. If they find this place, then it will be a massacre. We must act now." Benjamin's stern tone caused an immediate reaction from Ezra. He froze where he stood, and turned his head back towards Benjamin. With a slightly upset look, he addressed Benjamin's rant. "And what would you have me do, Benjamin? Have all of our people abandon the only home they have known since being stranded here? To go where? We have been safe here for generations, and will continue to be safe. The asteroid conceals us under its cosmic might. It not only sheathes us visually, but also shrouds our scent. The horde will never find this place, unless we are ignorant enough to lead him straight to us. We will do what we have always done. Stay put, and stay quiet." Benjamin looked beyond himself. Consumed by frustration, he raised his voice to the departing Ezra. "Then you will doom us all to death. Are you prepared to have that on your conscience, Ezra?" Benjamin's comments lit a fire within Ezra, as he turned back towards him. Rage filled his eyes, as he could not fathom the disrespect he had endured. Despite his limp, the agitated man eagerly leapt back to Benjamin. This time he stood mere inches from the man, nearly nose to nose. His breath was heavy, and his stare was intense. He looked Benjamin up and down before speaking. "Everything I do for the good of our people. How dare you insinuate anything other than that?" Ezra paused, as neither man backed down. Ezra continued. "I understand that you want the best for our people as well, Benjamin. But you are far too impulsive, a symptom of youth, I'm afraid. You act without thinking, and if you are not careful, then one day it shall be your downfall." Before Ezra could continue his point, Benjamin eagerly interjected. "I will gladly die protecting our people. If that makes me impulsive, then so be it." Ezra could not maintain his grimace any longer, as a smile broke through. Benjamin's words had broke the hardened man's scowl. He grinned at Benjamin, and placed his hand upon his shoulder. "There is no limit to your bravery, Benjamin, and for that I admire you a great deal. You are loyal to our people, and for that you have my respect." As he finished his sentence, Ezra pulled Benjamin towards him and embraced him. Benjamin could not help but smile as well after hearing Ezra's kind words. As Ezra released his embrace, he continued, "Tomorrow morning you will head a scout mission of the surrounding area. Do not stray too far, and stay hidden at all costs. You will return before nightfall, and report your findings to me." Ezra's tone was stern, but respectful towards Benjamin, who nodded in acknowledgement. "Yes, sir, and after I spot the horde in the meadow, I'd like to have another conversation about this." Ezra grinned at Benjamin again, before turning away. "Agreed. Now if you will excuse me, I have some examining to continue. It was good to make your acquaintance, Matthew. Be sure to make yourself at home. Benjamin, be sure to introduce him around, and set him up with his own room." Ezra then returned to his parchment at the candle-lit table. Matthew and Benjamin departed from Ezra's quarters, and continued on. As they walked, Benjamin filled Matthew in on their next destination. "I'll introduce you to Mary next. She will be much more open-minded to your claim. Ezra is a marvelous leader, but I believe that he is too hesitant and does not act when needed. He prefers to let things be, which I believe will catch up with him eventually. And what hurts Ezra will hurt the rest of us as well." The two returned to the central hub of the catacomb, and Benjamin escorted Matthew down another tunnel. The sound of distant music could be heard, as the men approached another open space. As Matthew peered into this room, he saw two women wielding instruments. These instruments were noticeably old, far older than the people utilizing them. They appeared to be kittens, and were in remarkably good shape for their age. The two strummed in harmony a truly beautiful tune. Benjamin and Matthew paused to admire their talent. As they continued to play their whimsical melody, the ladies began to hum. Their voices were angelic, with one being lower pitched than the other. Matthew observed in awe at the women's intricate fingerwork, as they frantically plucked the strings of the kittens. The lady sitting on the right was noticeably pregnant, at least 6 months, as her stomach protruded to a respectable point. The two musicians took notice of their viewers, and simply smiled as they continued to create their ballad. For a moment, Matthew seemed to lose himself in the intricate strums and inspiring sound. For that brief time, he had forgotten where he was or even who he was. All he experienced was the execution of pure talent before him. The gleeful melody then began to transition into a much more somber tune. So too did the women's humming, which shifted its pitch, which conveyed more of a melancholy feel. Their pace of strumming slowed down as well. Without saying any actual words, their hums and strums conveyed so much emotional information. The sound emanating from the performance created such a vast range of emotions in Matthew. The ballad was noticeably winding down, as the similar-looking women looked at one another. Then the somber song finally played its last note, as the women's fingers came to a rest. Their unified hum acted as a wonderful crescendo. After a brief pause, Matthew began to applaud the musicians. As he clapped, the two girls looked at him and blessed him with smiles. The woman on the left spoke. "Thank you, sir, you are too kind." Matthew responded swiftly. "You two are very talented, and that was beautiful." Then the woman on the right spoke. "Well, we don't usually have an audience, so we hope it wasn't too bad to listen to." Matthew scoffed, surprised by her modesty. "Not at all, sir. I assume one of you is Mary." Benjamin interjected. "Actually, these are Mary's daughters." Benjamin then gestured to the woman sitting on the left. "This is Christina, the younger of the two." He then gestured to the woman on the right, who smiled as he did. "And this is my beautiful wife, Amber. She is carrying our child." A surprised expression appeared on Matthew's face, as the new information genuinely caught him off guard. The idea of a married couple in such a place was not something he had even considered. "It's very nice to meet both of you." Matthew greeted Christina and Amber with a polite smile and wave. Benjamin then introduced Matthew to the sisters. "And this is Matthew, he just arrived last night." The sisters looked at Matthew with kindness in their faces. Amber spoke to Matthew. "Welcome, Matthew. I hope this place will not be too hard on you. It will take some time to adjust. I imagine you must have a lot of questions." "I know I would if I were in your shoes." Matthew shook his head in agreement. "Yes, I do. This all feels like some sort of nightmare." The sisters sympathized with Matthew, as Christina attempted to console him. "All will become clear with time, Matthew." Her smile calmed Matthew, who had not felt such a feeling in a while. Benjamin then chimed in on the conversation. "Is your mother in her quarters?" Amber nodded her head, as she looked at her husband. With this information, Benjamin began to depart the room, gesturing for Matthew to follow. As he was about to leave her sight, Amber called out to her husband. "Is this how you greet your wife, who you have not seen for 3 days? And could you not say hello to your child?" Matthew watched as a smile crept across Benjamin's cheeks. He turned around and gleefully reported to Amber. As he stood before her, their smiles synced. "My apologies, love. It's just that I have some urgent information for Miss Mary." As Amber looked up at Benjamin, she flashed a coy smile. "So urgent that you can't even spare your wife one kiss?" Amber's words broke through Benjamin's tough exterior. He knelt down and lovingly embraced his wife. As he released her, she commented, "Now was that so hard, Benny?" Her guilty smile radiated, as Benjamin had a slightly annoyed look on his face. "You know I hate it when you call me that." Benjamin knew that despite his request, Amber would continue to call him by his nickname. Well, maybe if you aren't gone for so long, I'll stop calling you that. Benjamin shook his head with a smile, then returned to his feet. He turned away from Amber and exited the room. Come, Matthew. His call to Matthew was heard, as Matthew waved goodbye to the sisters and followed Benjamin down the hall. The pathway curved and began to angle downward, as the men entered the bottom depths of the catacombs. The tunnel became quite eerie, as there was a noticeable reduction of torches the further they went down. Only the pulsing blue hue of the walls lit the path for Matthew and Benjamin. Finally, the ground beneath them began to level out, and before them was a long straight hallway, with only one room at the very end of it. Matthew followed Benjamin, as they approached the isolated quarters. Benjamin stopped before a beautifully carved door, with intricate and detailed markings from top to bottom. Benjamin seemed almost hesitant for a moment, as he looked at Matthew. Then he knocked 3 times upon the well-crafted door. The sound of slow approaching footsteps appeared from behind the door. The sound of a lock being unchained, then the door slowly opened. Then in the gap between the door and its frame, appeared the face of a small elderly woman. She smiled at the sight of Benjamin, and swung the door open the rest of the way. Benny, you have returned, safe and sound. The joyous woman wrapped herself around Benjamin, having not even noticed Matthew yet. Yes, though I am sad to say that my hunt was underwhelming. Only a few rabbits, I'm afraid. Benjamin had a slight tint of disappointment to his words. The elderly woman looked up at him, and placed her hand upon his cheek. Benjamin, you are too good to us. You could bring nothing back with you, so long as you come back in one piece. Benjamin's face matched her happy expression, as he turned his attention to Matthew. She then looked over to discover him standing beside Benjamin. Ah, and who is this kind-looking fellow? She asked with a warm and inviting smile. Mary, I'd like to introduce you to Matthew. We crossed paths whilst I was returning from the hunt. Mary extended her feeble hand out towards Matthew, and he mimicked her. He gently shook her hand and spoke. It is very nice to meet you, Mary. The sweet, mature woman clasped his hand with hers, and smiled. Welcome to our humble home, Matthew. It's nice to make your acquaintance as well. As their greeting had concluded, Benjamin cleared his throat to regain Mary's attention. So we have some alarming information that we must discuss. I also thought you would be best to fill Matthew in on, well, everything. Mary's sweet smile transitioned to a look of concern and woe. Alarming, you say? Well, come in then. Let us discuss this alarming news in the library. The 2 men waited as the elderly Mary steadily turned herself around, and retired to the library. Matthew and Benjamin followed her in. Matthew looked around the large room, which was nearly 50 feet long and around 30 feet wide. It was populated by about a dozen man-made bookshelves, which were filled with hundreds of books. The white bookshelves occupied the left and right sides of the room, whilst the middle aisle housed a few tables in the center, with walk space available on both sides. Along the center aisle of the room was a long and narrow blue rug with white accents. As Matthew gazed upon the large room, Mary carefully sat down in the nearest chair. Benjamin pulled out the chair beside her, and gestured at Matthew. The gazing man obliged him, and joined him at the 4-sided white table. As the 3 settled into their seats, Mary looked to Benjamin. She placed her hand on top of his. Okay, son, what is this news you have for me? Benjamin sighed before beginning his story. Matthew just arrived last night, and I met him atop Meadows Peak early this morning. Matthew saw the horde, here in the meadow. Not before you say anything, he was able to describe them perfectly to me in vivid detail. Mary was noticeably upset by the news and seemed to be thinking. After a moment she then turned her attention to Matthew. You are certain of this, Matthew? You saw the horde here in the meadows? Her sorrowful eyes caused Matthew to become a tad choked up in the moment. He responded to the woeful old woman. I'm afraid so, Mary. They chased me for some time, before I managed to lose them. I'm sorry if this news upsets you. Mary could sense Matthew's kindness, and shifted her sorrowful look into a more content one. Well, I'm just glad you were able to give them the slip, Matthew. That's what matters the most. Mary then turned her attention back to Benjamin to her left. I trust you informed Ezra of this. Benjamin nodded his head with a dissatisfied look. Yes, and as I'm sure you could predict, he decided it would be best to simply stay put. He ordered me to lead a scout party tomorrow morning, and to report any findings back to him. Mary thought for a moment, then responded to Benjamin. What would you do if you were in charge, my dear? Benjamin did not hesitate to describe his plans to Mary. If the horde managed to find this place, we would be sitting ducks down. Fish in a barrel, we would be trapped. We would all die. You know there is no end to them. We are only a few dozen strong, so combat is not ideal. Though at such small numbers, we could migrate with relative ease. Find somewhere else to live, far from its clutches and influence. Mary smiled at her son-in-law, and patted his hand with hers. Benjamin, you are such a brave man, and I am so honored to call you my son. I know you only want the best for all of us here, and you possess only good intentions. I love you so very much, and I cannot wait to meet my grandson. But my boy, I'm afraid to say that your plan is flawed. A frustrated expression instantly filled Benjamin's face, as he looked away from Mary. She noticed, and attempted to console him. Benny, look at me, please. Benjamin begrudgingly turned back towards his mother-in-law. Just hear me out, do not let your emotions get the best of you. I know you are only trying to keep us safe, but your plan to move us to a different location will absolutely result in the opposite. Survivors have lived safely here for generations, and for a good reason. It is safe, the horde have never found it. There is no promise that there are any other places for us to go. If we abandon the only refuge we have, then we could be dooming ourselves to perish. Benjamin interjected with grand emotion to his words. Mary, I will not let anything happen to Amber or my child. They are all that matters to me in this world, and I must do what is best for my family. The emotional man seemed determined and his words felt adamant. She calmly addressed Matthew. I know you will, Benjamin, because you are a good man. Ezra is a good man as well, and he also wants to do what is best for his family. We only survive when we work together. We must keep the peace, or else we will all pay the punishment. Please just go out tomorrow morning, then we will discuss this further afterwards. Benjamin seemed to have calmed down back to a normal level, and shook his head in agreement. Okay, Mary, you've got a deal. The motherly Mary smiled at her boy with pride, for she was genuinely proud of how strong and brave Benjamin had become. Okay, now Benjamin, could you be a dear and retrieve the codex for me? I've grown quite tired. Benjamin did not hesitate. Of course, Mary. With a smile, Benjamin departed from the table to retrieve the codex. Mary then looked to Matthew and spoke. Best get comfortable, Matthew, this is a long story. A long story. Benjamin placed the codex before Mary, and stood beside her. Mary grasped the cover of the massive book, and carefully opened it. The book looked absolutely ancient, but still managed to stay intact. I am sure you have many questions, Matthew. Most if not all of the answers will be in here. Mary explained to Matthew the significance of the codex. This book is far older than any text in the world we came from. For thousands of years, the poor souls that have found themselves stranded here have protected this sacred text. For this text reveals the truth of this horrid place. Matthew leaned forward, eager to learn the mysteries of this place, and how it all connected to his daughter. Mary turned the first page, which was completely blank, revealing the next page which was full with text. Though this text was of no recognizable language, sensing Matthew's confusion, Mary explained the reason of the strange text. I know, an odd-looking language, right? This codex is written entirely in a nearly dead language. One that I have painstakingly learned from those who came before me, and they learned from those who came before them. It takes the utmost dedication to master its intricate form and structure. Due to this, few learn it, though I have made sure that my children and even Benjamin can fluently read and speak it. For it is my responsibility to carry on the language, assuring its life before my life concludes. Benjamin placed her hand upon Mary's shoulder and smiled at her. Well, that won't be for a long time. You've got to stick around for your grandchild. Mary smiled back at her son-in-law, then turned back toward Matthew and the codex. Now let us begin. At the first tick of time's eternal clock, all was born into existence. The entirety of good, and the entirety of malevolence, occupied the void of space. Though the good and malevolent forces began to bond separate from one another, the good took its own form, and so too did the malevolence. In the deep dark void of eternal space, the malevolence yearned to spread its design across all that existed. The good desired the same, to convey its positivity to every inch of space. Some eons ago, life began to sprout about the cosmos. With life, slowly came consciousness. Malevolent force had finally found a suitable host to manifest itself within, that being life. For the malevolent force could live through all biological life, in the form of all negativity. For every living thing that felt despair, the malevolence grew its influence. This malevolent force is formless and lifeless, but persists on with its goal to possess all living things with its darkness. Though this entity is nameless, we coined it the name of amalgama. For it is the amalgamation of all malevolence. Slowly throughout time, amalgama's influence has spread throughout the cosmos, infiltrating the hearts and minds of all of those unfortunate to fall into its grasp. With the forming of planets and societies, amalgama used its infinite reach to allure the eager and greedy into its clutches. Those whose minds were poisoned by amalgama's enticing nature would spread its influence to all life around them. Soon the entirety of these worlds would fall victim to amalgama's dark power, until one day that a worthy vessel would be birthed, capable of withholding amalgama's power. On that day, the world would falter its poisonous allure. Planet after planet, solar system after solar system, galaxy after galaxy, amalgama has depleted them all of life. Every life poisoned by its influence, added to amalgama's might. This pattern has carried on for eons, an endless amount of worlds falling to its black shadow. Then some million years or so ago, amalgama set its sights on Earth. A planet ripe and full of life, which greatly enticed the cosmic horror. Though due to the vast distance between it and Earth, amalgama's influence was very slow. Instead of possessing the minds of humans directly, amalgama decided instead to inspire the masses through deception. Through the guise of religion and ritual, the imperceptible entity slowly infected the veins of humanity. For amalgama is a master trickster and an artful deceiver. Those whose hearts were filled by greed or lust would inevitably find themselves under its spell. Though the Dark One required a chamber to collect all of its deceived souls, and house its massive army. So through its cosmic authority, it created another Earth, though this one existed on the same dimensional plane as amalgama. This allowed its connection to be stronger, and made it possible to morph the shape of its followers into horrid abominations. For that is the true form of its malevolence. Now the sinister entity merely awaits its befitting host, so that it may transfer its essence into the vessel. Then amalgama will be capable of existing on Earth, and conquer it once and for all. Then it will simply move on to the next planet, until it inevitably conquers the entirety of the universe. Mary gracefully closed the cover of the codex, and sealed its latch. She looked at Matthew, who sat silent, looking completely baffled. The man's mind was totally overwhelmed by the flood of information that it had just received. He rubbed his face with his open hands, and sighed. Wow, I'm at a loss for words." Matthew said, as Mary gestured for Benjamin to retrieve the codex. He hoisted the large book from off of the table and departed down the library's long hall. I know, it's a lot to take in all at once. Most people have a hard time grasping it. Some have even said that it sounds like the plot of a terrible book. Mary attempted to help Matthew grasp the vast weight of the reality he had found himself in. We have all unfortunately been entangled in the self-perceived destiny of an inconceivable evil. We did not ask to be here, but here we are, and we all simply try to make the best of it. We live our quiet lives, and enjoy each other's company. I personally started a family that will continue to grow. My daughters have never known anything other than this place. To them the earth you and I came from would be alien. My grandchild will be born into this world, and will carry on the teachings of the Codex. Matthew, not jiving with Mary's outlook of her situation, interjected. But why simply accept this as not only your destiny, but the destiny of your offspring? Why take it laying down? Why not fight it, and find a way back? Mary placed her hand on Matthew's wrist to calm the tense man. Matthew, don't you think we have tried that? This train only travels in one direction. Once you have passed through void, you have reached your final stop. I have spent decades scouring every single page of that book. Men and women for thousands of years had tried to find an escape, a way back home. They all failed, and settled for a modest life. They built this place, for to linger out there was to sign your death warrant. The horde is absolutely endless, and cannot be reasoned with. Matthew spoke out. But still, fight back. Do not hide in this hole, waiting to die. Mary simply smiled at the rebellious man. I've watched many with that same attitude, all fall to the same fate. One after the next, they all became members of the horde. You see, Matthew, in this place, there is a fate far worse than death. If one of those repulsive beasts manage to scratch you or bite you, its DNA will enter your bloodstream. After that happens, you will go through a truly horrifying transformation. One both physical and mental, until you eventually become one of them. It is a slow and agonizing process, one I have had to bear witness to more times than I can count. I have lost countless friends to the dreaded horde, and have witnessed as their inner light was snuffed out. No longer themselves, they simply become an empty vessel, mutated beyond recognition. They join an endless sea of violent and bloodthirsty monsters. There is not defeating them, Matthew. The horde mindlessly and endlessly consume, never once stopping to ponder their own existence. Their only purpose, to grow the power and influence of their overlord. The very same dark force that poisoned their mind and body. Matthew felt an immense sense of frustration, and felt hopeless. His thoughts shifted to his daughter, and his worry for her. His emotions began to overwhelm him, and it was clear for Mary to see, as tears began to well up in his eyes. Sweetheart, I know it is a hard pill to swallow, but I promise with time this place will come to feel like home. Matthew clarified the reason for his emotions. I'm not upset for myself, Mary, but for my daughter. Mary assumed Matthew's meaning. I know, you want to get back to her. When I first got here, I wanted nothing more than to get back to my parents. I struggle with the reality that they're both long gone by now, and I never got to say goodbye to them. I know the pain, but she has her family to watch over her. Matthew set the record straight for Mary, so that she did not get the wrong idea. You don't understand, she was taken from me. These cult members stole her from my home, and... Matthew struggled to fight back the tears and overwhelming grief that built up just beneath his skin. He breathed, and calmed himself down. And hurt someone very special to me. I followed him to this warehouse, where they were performing some sort ritual. I tried to talk sense into them, but they were determined to take her from me. Their leader said that she was very important, that she was the prophecy child. Mary's eyes widened and she sat up straight in her chair. She looked absolutely petrified by Matthew's words. Oh my God, this cannot be. Mary swiftly turned around towards Benjamin, who was still returning the codex to its case. She hollered to her son-in-law. Benjamin, bring the codex back, now. Benjamin, looking somewhat confused, complied and started back towards the table. Matthew did not understand her wild reaction. What's wrong, Mary? The elderly woman had become quite spry, as Benjamin placed the codex before her once again. She frantically began flipping through the ancient book's many pages, searching for something. Matthew and Benjamin shared a common look of confusion as they watched the distraught woman. Finally, she broke her silence and addressed the emotional father. Matthew, do you by chance have a photograph of your daughter? Matthew paused for a moment, then recalled the family photo placed in his wallet. He nodded at Mary. May I please see it? I assure you that it is of the utmost importance. Matthew complied and retrieved his wallet, then carefully removed the portrait from the protective plastic covering. As he leaned over to hand Mary the photograph, her frantic fingers had come to a rest. She retrieved the photograph from Matthew and looked at it in great detail. Then she shifted her attention to the page in the codex. Finally, she placed the photograph on the page, as if to compare them side by side. A sudden look of horrid realization was painted upon the old woman. She looked up at Benjamin with terror in her eyes. It is her Benjamin, she is the prophecy child. Benjamin's expression mimicked Mary's, taking on the same look of dread. Matthew, feeling completely left out on some information pertaining to his daughter, demanded answers. What is going on? What does all of this nonsense have to do with my Anna? After a moment of silence, Mary's eyes shifted from the codex to Matthew. She gently returned the photograph to him, then addressed the concerned father. Your daughter is very beautiful, Matthew. She seemed very hesitant to reveal the secret she seemed to have. Matthew gave her a frustrated expression, eagerly awaiting the important information. Do you recall my mention of a worthy vessel that Amalgama could embody? Every world that the dark entity has conquered fell the exact same way. A child was born to the world that was capable of withholding the endless power of Amalgama. It would then transfer its essence into the child, which allowed it to exist within the world. Then, Amalgama would unleash its full and unfiltered power upon the defenseless world, poisoning every last living thing. It has done it to an endless amount of worlds, some taking thousands or even millions of years. But eventually, the day has always come. Earth is simply Amalgama's most recent target. The vessels that are capable of housing its immense force are referred to as prophecy children in the codex. They all share a common feature, this symbol. Mary struggled to push the large book towards Matthew. Once it was near enough for him to view, Mary pointed her trembling finger towards an image on the page. Matthew's heart sank as he stared at the all-too-familiar symbol on the page. For it was the very same symbol that Anna was born with on her cheek. Despair filled the man's soul, like a sinking vessel. The thought of his innocent child being wrapped up in this chaos, and knowing how scared she must be, caused the man to weep once more. Painfully similar to when he held his deceased wife, Matthew's emotions ran haywire and became uncontrollable. He manically grabbed hold of Mary's brittle hands from across the table. With a frightening expression of psychotic desperation, Matthew looked her in the eyes. Please, help me save her. She is all that matters to me. She doesn't deserve this. You must help me. She's just a child. Mary at first looked quite startled by Matthew's sporadic behavior, but quickly came to empathize with the deeply wounded man before her. Matthew's head dipped down onto the table, and the man wept with his face pressed into the wood. Mary gently removed her hands from under Matthew's, and began to caress his back. She could feel his frantic breathing begin to slow, as she continued to comfort him. Shush, calm child. Mary whispered, as she could relate to his pain and fear. The mere thought of her daughters in danger filled the aged woman with such agony, she felt it her responsibility to help the man sat across from her. From one parent to another, she spoke to the distraught man. "Matthew, we will save your daughter, I promise you." Matthew was not consoled, as his mind raced with worries. "They are going to use Anna as a vessel for this spirit. We have to do something now." Mary replied, "Breath, Matthew, and listen. Due to the immense distance between Amalgama and Hysteria, his connection is rather weak. Imagine a radio station with a heavy amount of static, the link is hazy at best. Being in the same dimension as it makes the connection stronger, but it is still remarkably fragile. Because of this, Amalgama will have to wait until the passage is clear to attempt an essence transfer. For to send its essence across such a vast distance is extremely risky for the cosmic evil. This only happens approximately every 21 days. Matthew immediately asked for more information. "And when did it happen last?" Mary thought for a moment, trying to recall. "It was 2 weeks as of yesterday, so it has been 15 days. Soon to be 16, so we have 5 days before the ritual will be attempted. In that time, we must come up with a plan of action. The fate of the entire world depends on it." Benjamin involved himself into the conversation. "We must tell Ezra at once." Mary nodded her head. "Agreed." Mary slowly rose from her seat, noticeably struggling. Benjamin attempted to assist her, but Mary politely swatted him away in an act of independence. The three then worked their way through the many tunnels of the catacombs, on the way to Ezra's private quarters at the very top. Just beneath the sparkling and pulsing asteroid, Ezra remained at his table, still studying the parchment from before. Then a knock at his door. Ezra made sure to conceal the large piece of paper under other forms. He then turned towards the door and cleared his throat. "Enter." His low baritone voice echoed off of the crystal ceiling. The door opened, then Mary, Benjamin and Matthew eagerly entered into the domicile. At the sight of Mary, a calming smile appeared on Ezra's face. "Ah, hello Ms. Mary. To what do I owe the honor of your presence? I imagine it must be quite important for you to venture the steep trip to my room." Mary did not share the same warm and inviting attitude as Ezra. Instead, she showed a face of concern and a look of exhaustion. As she struggled her way into the room, Benjamin hastily retrieved a nearby chair. He placed it beneath Mary, who then gently sat down upon it. "My God, Mary, you look absolutely spent. Here, have some water." Ezra grasped a hold of a wooden pitcher located on his table. He then grabbed a small wooden cup and quickly spilled the cool water into it. He then approached Mary, who was panting, and handed her the cup. Instead of drinking the pint of water, Mary instead chose to pour the cup full directly on top of her head. The drenched woman then let out a long sigh of relief. "That's much better." Mary took a moment to catch her breath, then looked at Ezra, who had sat back down at his table. Ezra looked on with a curious look on his face, waiting for Mary to fill him in on the reason of her visit. "I'm glad you feel better, Mary. Now tell me what you came all the way up here to tell me." Mary licked her lips and inhaled, then spoke to the impatient man. "Ezra, as you know, this is Matthew." Ezra nodded his head, seemingly uninterested. "Yes, the man who just arrived last night, and claims to have been chased by the horde here in the meadow. Benjamin filled me in on his story." Mary's eyebrows rose at Ezra. "Yes, but there is a chapter of that story that you have not heard. A detail that will interest you, for it involves us all." Ezra leaned forward, as Mary's comment had piqued his interest. His hand gestured towards the elderly woman. "Well, do tell Ms. Mary, what is so special about this man?" Mary also leaned forward, as Matthew and Benjamin stood behind her. "It is not the man himself so much that is significant, but his offspring. You see, Matthew's daughter is the prophecy child." Ezra scoffed, then sat back in his chair, with a look of annoyance. Mary attempted to regain Ezra's attention. "It is the truth, Ezra. She bears the mark, the very same in the Codex. Amalgame's mark, upon her cheek. It seeks to transfer its essence into the young girl. And through her, it will attempt to shroud Earth in its darkness once and for all. We have but 5 days, we must act. Ezra noticeably shook his head, and rolled his eyes. Mary, come now, you're telling me that you came all the way up here to tell me this. The prophecy child is a myth. People have been stranded here for over 50,000 years. Don't you think this supposed prophecy child would have arrived by now? Face it, Mary, the Codex was written by sad and lonely survivors long ago. They had nothing better to do, so they made up reasons for this place to exist, and for them to be stuck here. Mary looked disappointed by her old friend's words. Ezra, I have spent decades of my life dedicated to learning the secrets of that book. To learn the reason as to why we are all here. It was not in the name of boredom, but in the spirit of discovery. You once shared the same passion as I do. What happened, my friend? Ezra's face turned from Mary, as he gazed at the flame atop his candle. He ran the palm of his hand over the flame. I've grown old in this place, Mary. Once a young, ambitious man ready to conquer the entirety of Hysteria, now sits before you an old, worn-out man, simply waiting for death. Perhaps I've grown bitter. I always imagined that you and I would find a way out of this place, but that day never came. Here you and I sit, grey and wrinkled, our whole lives lost to this dreadful oasis. We had families, that are now long gone. We had friends for years here, who all fell to the horde. Of the original bunch, you and I are all that remain. And soon you and I will be nothing but a fleeting memory, that wisp away. Ezra then blew a gust of wind, extinguishing the candle's flame. Mary achingly stood from the chair, and approached her friend. She stood beside him, with her hand atop his shoulder. My friend, look at me. Ezra obliged, with melancholy in his eyes. Our story is not over yet, Ezra. Let our final chapter be what defines our legacy. We will not be yet 2 more silent victims of this evil place, but the conquerors of Hysteria. Let us vanquish this dark shadow that has blocked out all hope in us. You and I can part the clouds, and revel in the sun at last. We can die heroes, and banish the Dark One back to its dwellings. A look of hope twinkled in Ezra's tired eyes, as a small sliver of his youth held on, still alive within him. He smiled at his old friend, and pulled her in for a hug. As their embrace concluded, Ezra looked Mary in the eyes. Thank you, my friend, for pulling me out of the rut, once again. Mary smiled back at Ezra. I will always be here, especially in your darkest moments. Now let us speak of the business at hand. Matthew, would you please bring the photograph over here? Matthew obliged and approached the elders. He handed Mary the photograph, who then handed it to Ezra. The man looked at picture for a long time, then looked up at Matthew. You have a beautiful family, Matthew. The father began to choke up from Ezra's words, though he fought through it. Thank you, Ezra, they're everything to me. Matthew choked back the tears that desperately desired to break free. What are their names? Ezra asked, with a kind face. My daughter's name is Anna, and... Matthew paused, defiantly holding back the inevitable grief. He breathed in slow, and Benjamin looked at him, puzzled. After exhaling, Matthew tried again. And my wife's name. Matthew could not bear to utter his wife's name, for the wound in his heart was very fresh. He had not even begun the grieving process, and could not erase that haunting image from his mind. He clasped his eyes tight, as his lips began to tremble. His head sunk down, and despite his best efforts, he began to sob once again. The sense of embarrassment was bested only by his feelings of uproarious agony. His body was not considerate of Matthew's desire to keep his pain sheathed. It mimicked on the outside what it was experiencing on the inside. All was revealed to the others in the room, as Matthew collapsed onto the floor. Benjamin looked down at the crumbling man. Matthew, what is it that eats away at you? Is it your daughter? As I told you before, I will do everything in my power to return her to you, safe and sound. Not only that, but I promise to behead every last soul that gets in our way." He knelt down beside Matthew, and placed his hand on the sobbing man's back. Matthew spoke, whilst his face stayed facing the floor. "They killed her, they fucking killed her." Benjamin's face was filled by confusion. "Who did they kill, Matthew?" asked Benjamin, as he looked at Mary and Ezra. Before Matthew could say anything, Ezra said the painful words for him. "His wife. They killed his wife, then stole his child. Isn't that right, Matthew?" Ezra spoke with such confidence in his voice, as he felt quite confident with his prediction. Benjamin and Mary looked towards Matthew, who simply nodded his head, confirming Ezra's saddening words. "My God, Matthew, I am so sorry for your loss." Mary spoke softly, feeling such pity for the broken man. "I swear to you, Matthew, we will avenge her death. We will round up every willing man, and we will find the ones responsible. Then we will deal out justice upon them. Isn't that right, Ezra?" Benjamin spoke, trying to reassure the mourning man. Then, after not hearing Ezra, Benjamin looked up at him, to see him simply staring back with a blank look. "Ezra!" Benjamin called out to him once more. Ezra clasped his hands together, and leaned his elbows down onto his knees. "No man deserves to feel such pain. No man should have to mourn his wife's passing, and no man should have to fear for his child's safety. What has happened to you is unjust, Matthew, and I would not wish it upon my worst enemy." Ezra paused, before continuing, feeling empathy for the man. "Though we must be wise, if we are to survive, we cannot afford to act impulsively, in the name of anger. We are few in numbers, and allowing blind rage to lead us will only end in our demise." Benjamin looked disgusted by Ezra's words, and Matthew's face slowly rose from the floor. He looked at Ezra, who had never seen a man who held so much dread in his eyes. He stared at Ezra with disdain for what felt like forever, then spoke. "What if it was your wife, and your child, Ezra? What if you held your dead wife in your arms, knowing that you had failed to protect her? That you had failed to protect your daughter? Knowing that you will never be able to undo it, and knowing you can never speak to her again? Never hear her voice, or feel her embrace, ever again? It is not blind rage, Ezra. My eyes are wide open. I will not act out of rage. I will act calculated, and I will keep the promise I made to her. The promise I made to Elizabeth. I will save my daughter, and I will kill any man or woman or beast that gets in my way." Ezra looked back at Matthew, seeing the pain in his eyes. Though he refused to allow empathy to motivate his decisions, he believed that it was integral for a leader to eliminate all emotion from his decision-making. He felt that the fate of his people depended on it. "I will not sacrifice my men as cannon fodder to the endless horde, to fulfill your bloodlust for vengeance, Matthew. Though I cannot simply sit here and do nothing either. It seems that your daughter is in fact this prophecy child. If that is the case, then the lives of not only my people, but the lives of everyone on earth is at risk. We must act to prevent the Dark Lord's goal from coming to fruition. And Matthew, act we shall. However, we will do it my way." Matthew wiped the tears from his face, and nodded his head towards Ezra. He then returned to his feet, with the assistance of Benjamin. Mary then chimed in on the subject at hand. "If they are to attempt the essence transfer, it shall commence in 5 days' time, at Light's End. We know when and where it will be done. What we must do is figure out the how in which we shall prevent the transfer from occurring." Matthew looked to Benjamin with a questionable look. Benjamin had a good idea what Matthew was wondering, and filled him in. Light's End is a colossal structure you see at the very eclipse of Hysteria, where the black void of the heavens meets the earth below. It was built by the Horde in Amalgame's honor, some many thousands of years ago. The cosmic entity's influence is strongest there, for its essence flows freely through the void above. Matthew did not pretend to understand any of the massive forces that surrounded him, though he knew that his daughter was stuck in the middle of it, and he would not rest until she was safe. That, or he would reach his demise in her pursuit. Ezra had thought on the best course of action, and was now ready to reveal said plan. We obviously cannot begin to match the forces that serve at Amalgame's behest. If the Dark Lord senses our presence anywhere near Light's End, it will unleash the entirety of the Horde's might down upon us. That rules out the ludicrous idea of storming the structure head-on, obviously. So naturally this leaves us with only the approach of stealth. We must attempt to infiltrate the structure, locate Anna, and remove her from that wicked place. Though the Horde will no doubt pursue us, and the likeliness of pulling of this rescue unnoticed is quite slim. However, if we do successfully rescue your daughter from Light's End, we will return here. And it is of the utmost importance that we do this undetected. We cannot afford to lead the Horde back to our shelter, for that will no doubt bring upon our people's end. Benjamin shook his head and smiled, pleased by Ezra's willingness to assist. Mary had her own thoughts to add as well. Ezra, our food supply is dwindling at an alarming rate. If you are to send the strongest and fastest on this journey, that will leave the rest of us here. We must be supplied, on the unfortunate chance that you do not return. For if we do not, the rest of our people will starve. Winter is coming, and they will stand no chance of finding food. Ezra concurred with Mary's words. You're right, we must make sure that our people have a sustainable source of food. Let us adjust tomorrow's scouting mission to a hunt. Benjamin, we must procure as much food as possible. Take as many men as you need. Leave at first light. Then after that, we will depart on our quite futile rescue mission. Benjamin acknowledged Ezra's command with a nod, and responded, Yes, sir, I will head down to the dining hall and inform the men. Come on, Matthew, I'll introduce you. Matthew obliged, and began to follow Benjamin out of Ezra's chamber. Then Ezra called out to the man, Matthew. The father stopped in his tracks, then turned around to face Ezra. I too was a father, and from one father to another, I understand the anguish you must be feeling inside. Ezra paused for a moment, with sincerity in his eyes. Now get some food, then some rest. Benjamin will set you up with your own sleeping quarters. Matthew forced a smile on his face to show gratitude. Thank you, Ezra. With that, Matthew departed with Benjamin. Ezra and Mary remained in their seats, eyes looking at one another. The two had known one another for so long, that they could understand one another without speech. They smiled at one another, and Mary broke the silence. I know, I never thought I'd live to see the day. It makes me feel truly special to bear witness to what comes next. Ezra ran his fingers through his beard, and added his thoughts. Yes, regardless of how it turns out, in a few days we will see the end of the story. One way or another, we will meet a conclusion. I would very much like to meet this Anna. I'm sure she has no idea of the true power that dwells within her. Mary's smile faded, seemingly not pleased with Ezra's comment. She is but a child, Ezra. There is no need to discuss such things. Ezra lowered his head and smiled, acknowledging Mary's words. Very well, perhaps when she is older, if I live long enough. Mary smiled too, and shook her head, not surprised by her old friend's words. Then she spoke. Do you really intend on making the journey to Light's End? Your knee has been bad for years. Ezra's expression seemed somewhat annoyed, as he rolled his eyes. Mary, someone must show these young men how it is done. Without me, the mission will be an absolute failure. They would cause more harm than good without me. Mary immediately responded, strongly disagreeing with Ezra's opinion. Benjamin has grown to become a wondrous leader, Ezra. He possesses all of the desired traits. He is confident, empathetic and resilient. And impulsive, Mary. Despite his many positive qualities, that one could mean the death of us all. He does not think before acting. Mary persisted in her defense of Benjamin. He would do anything to protect these people, Ezra. He only has good intentions. Ezra politely debated back with his old friend. Mary, one can mean well, and still make poor decisions. I fear he lacks the proper foresight to make the best choices for our people. Mary slowly climbed out from her chair and approached Ezra. Well, my friend, as sad as it makes me to say it, you and I will not be around forever. These people will need someone to watch over them after we are gone. And I see no stronger candidate than Benjamin. Ezra also stood up and faced Mary. I will admit, the man has an immeasurable passion for these people. Perhaps he will make for a fine leader, one day. Mary wrapped her arm around Ezra's. Now would you be so kind as to help an old woman back to her room? She smiled to Ezra, and he to her. Of course, Ms. Mary, let's go. Some 100 or so feet lower, Matthew and Benjamin made their way towards the dining hall. The red soil was decorated by their footsteps, and the blue hue of the walls shined upon them. They exited one tunnel, just to then enter another. Matthew thought of the place as an intricate underground maze. It's right down her, Matthew. I hope you like rabbit. Matthew looked down at his grumbling stomach, and was willing to eat just about anything to remove his hunger. Rabbit sounds amazing, he remarked, as the sound of many voices approached. The two entered through a passageway on the right, revealing yet another massive space. All along this large room were several white wooden tables, many of which were populated by the residents of this lively catacomb. Candles all around sprinkled the space with yellow light, which danced with the pulsing blue of the walls. At the far end of the room was a massive fire, with stones surrounding it. Rested atop the fire was a large cauldron, with smoke pouring out from it. Several men sat around the fire, conversing with one another. Standing beside the cauldron was a large familiar man. Carl stirred the contents of the cauldron, whilst laughing along with his compatriots. Ah, smells great. Let us go see how Carl's rabbit stew is coming along, Matthew. Benjamin smacked Matthew across the back, then headed towards the fire pit. Matthew followed, noticing all the eyes on him. His somewhat clean appearance made Matthew stand out like a sore thumb to these people. He could hear whispers and snickering all around, as he hastily followed Benjamin. Carl spotted the two approaching, and threw his hands up in excitement, ladle still in hand. As the stew dripped down onto his arm, Carl smiled and shouted, Benji boy, come my friend, aren't you brought Master Matthew with you too? As Matthew and Benjamin reached the fire pit, the large German approached. He threw his massive arms around the lads, and easily sheathed both of them in his shadow. As Carl lovingly squeezed the two, his booming voice filled their ears. Matthew, I hope Benji here has been a welcoming host for you. We really do have a lovely home here, don't ya think? As Matthew struggled to breath under the bear man's grasp, he managed to squeeze out a few words. It's lovely here, Carl, thank you. To the men's relief, Carl released his massive hug. Come along, lads. Benji, I was just telling the fellas the story of No-Eyed Stumpy. Benjamin slapped his hand to his forehead, and rolled his eyes. Matthew suddenly became quite curious in this story. You always tell it the best, Benji, let us hear it. Carl requested. It was so long ago, Carl, I barely remember it. Carl shook his head, and dropped his ladle back in the soup, causing it to splash upward. Please, Benji, it's a good ol' time when you tell it. Carl pleaded with Benjamin, whose face began to turn red. Fine, I will tell the story. Carl and the men around the fire all cheered, as they turned their attention to Benjamin. Carl gestured towards an open seat for Matthew to sit down. As Matthew took his seat, Benjamin moved to the center of the fire pit, and began the story. Some years ago, Carl, myself and a few other men had decided it was a good idea to venture outside of the meadow. Spoiler, it was not a good idea. The men all laughed, Carl's being the loudest by far. We had journeyed for hours, and had found ourselves in Oliveview Swamp. It was far into the dusk of night, and the swamp's water glowed red from the sky above. All along the swamp were a dozen or so small little islands of land. In the dead center lay a particularly large chunk of land, some 100 feet or so away. On this particular swamp island was a rock, a very large rock. Now, being young and particularly foolish men at the time, we all decided that we should race to this rock. The sound of slurping filled the air as Matthew turned to see Carl drinking some soup. Benjamin looked at him with a smile, then continued his tale. Anyways, we all sprinted towards the island at the center of the swamp. Within seconds we were all soaked from the splashing of the muddy water. Fortunately, this section of the swamp's water was quite shallow, no more than a foot deep. So the 5 of us are running like fools, tripping over rocks and branches, having a blast. As we got closer, it was clear that it was a dead tie between Carl and myself. Carl interjected whilst still eating his soup. "The best part's coming, fellas." Benjamin's eyes rolled. "All right, so it's Carl and I, neck and neck. Only about 15 feet between us and the large rock. I begin to take the lead, only for this giant German bastard to slam himself into me. This caused me to tumble about 10 feet away." Carl began to obnoxiously laugh, before noticing Benjamin's unimpressed look. He quieted down, and gestured his spoon towards Benjamin. "Please continue, Benji." After the large German settled down, Benjamin continued. "So, as soon as I stopped rolling, I looked up to see Carl standing atop the rock. He had won the race. We all gathered around the rock and had to listen to Carl boast about his victory. Then, the spine-chilling sound of a lone horde trudger filled the air. We all froze and looked all about. Then from behind the massive rock, emerged a foul horde beast. Like all members of the horde, this creature was absolutely hideous. But what stood out above this particular chap was his complete lack of eyes. The poor soul did not possess a single eyeball. Most horde have at least 5, if not 100 little eyeballs all over its nasty corpse. This fella, however, was completely eyeless. His other standout feature was just how short and stumpy his 3 legs were. The fella stood no more than 3 feet off of the ground. It really is crazy the shapes these poor souls can take. Anyways, as the beast lumbered forward, we could tell it was searching for us. Though it couldn't see us, it could certainly smell us. We all froze, not knowing what to do. I grew closer and closer to us, sniffing all about, with its slimy little digits extended outward. I reached my hand down to unsheath my sword, so that I could strike down the blind beast. However, there was no sword to grab. My sword had fallen off of me when Carl tackled me. Carl could not help himself in the moment, and chuckled under his breath. I panicked as the beast grew extremely close to me. Its stretched out fingers only inches from my face. I had become frozen with fear. Then the sound of a war cry broke out. I looked to see Carl charging forward, as he crashed into the blind creature. He must have sent the beast at least 10 feet. The poor soul landed in the swamp water, and didn't move a muscle. Anyway, I found my sword and we headed back to the meadow. We never ventured back to Oliveview Swamp again, that it until next year. The crowd of men roared out in laughter. As Benjamin took a seat, Carl lovingly smacked him across the back. Benjamin winced at the impact of Carl's massive hand. "A lovely tale as always, Benji, now let's eat," roared Carl, who began to fill wooden bowls full to the brim with his steaming hot soup. The warm bowls and spoons were passed around the fire, until everyone had received one. Everyone immediately dug into the soup without hesitation, as if they were very hungry. Matthew looked at the soup, and played with it for a moment. He inspected it closely, wanting to know exactly what was in it. The soup mainly comprised of chunks of potato and rabbit meat, with some sort of gravy and juice. As Matthew spun his spoon about the bowl, the man sitting to his left took notice of his behavior. He commented on Matthew's fidgeting. "You're a little old to be playing with your food, don't ya think?" Matthew looked over at the man. He was an older gentleman, likely in his mid-60s, with a well-groomed Van Dyke on his face. His hair was surprisingly dapper, and stood out among the men's long shaggy heads around them. Carl finished his bowl within moments, and licked his chops. As he tossed his bowl onto the ground, he looked around at his friends. The man charmed Matthew with a friendly smile, to which Matthew did the same. "I'm just a bit picky with my food is all," Matthew responded. "You can't afford to be picky here, friend. You eat what is offered, for it is never certain when your next meal will arrive." The man ate with nuance and sophistication, unlike the others who aggressively slurped and chewed. "So there's a food shortage then?" asked Matthew. The man ran his fingers through his groomed facial hair and crossed his legs before responding. "My yes, has been for quite some time. Some of the youngsters around here have only ever known this scarcity. It has always been their reality, to never take a meal for granted. The meadow may be our sanctuary, but it has grown sparse of life over the years. It'll only get worse once the frost comes." Matthew tentatively raised the spoon to his lips. The broth was extremely hot, but its flavor delighted Matthew's taste buds. He tried another sip to confirm, and was met with the same exciting aroma. He then began to consume large spoonfuls of the soup, making sure to get a helping of meat and potatoes in every bite. Matthew had not remembered the last time he had tasted something so scrumptious. As he finished his bowl, he raised it in the air and turned to Carl. "Compliments to the chef, that was amazing. I have never tasted something quite like that." Carl had moved on to his second bowl, and paused from inhaling his food long enough to respond. "I'm glad you enjoyed it, Matty. I doubt you would have ever tasted anything like it, since the herbs I use only grow here on Hysteria. You won't find 'em back home." Carl then went back to engulfing his second meal. Benjamin, who sat next to Matthew, leaned towards him and chimed in. "Carl is an amazing cook. He'd be world famous back on old Earth." His comment caused the men to laugh and speak among one another. As Matthew placed his bowl on the ground between his feet, the man to his left extended his hand forward. Matthew looked over at him. A gentleman of matured appearance, sporting silver hair atop his head. Standing out prominently among his worn and faded clothing was a golden cross upon his chest. Noticeable marks that could only be caused by a swinging blade decorated the cross, which indicated the object had seen battle, along with its owner. "The name's Isaac, and I've gathered from the chit-chat that your name's Matthew. How do you do?" Matthew gladly shook Isaac's hand. "Matthew Cooper, it's good to meet you. Well, I'll be honest, I'm still quite shocked by all of this. I just found myself here last night, and I've had to take in a ton of information. It's honestly overwhelming." Isaac placed his empty bowl beside him, and wiped his hands off on his trousers. "That is very common, and to be expected. Some days I still feel like this is all just one long daunting nightmare, and someday I'll wake up back home. But I fear that day will never come." Matthew sensed the disappointment in Isaac, and tried to console him. "Well, it seems that everyone has made the best of it, and this place is charming in its own way. Everyone seems comfortable here." Isaac nodded his head. "Yes, well, many of them were born here, so this is normal to them. As for me, well, I've spent more time here than I did in the old world. I've planted my roots here, this is home now. Though I still dream of my old life, that can be dangerous. You spend too much time mourning the past, while your future passes you by." Matthew sensed that Isaac was a well of information, with a plethora of life experience under his belt. Matthew responded, "At a certain point in life, you've just got to prioritize what's most important, and focus the time you've got left on that. Besides, everything happens for a reason. Even the worst of things. It's all part of God's plan for us. Matthew nodded respectfully, not wishing to offend Isaac. Though he never considered himself religious, Matthew had always respected others' beliefs. Though he found it surprising that one could hold on to something immaterial such as faith, in a horrid place such as this. Matthew respectfully inquired upon the thought. It's admirable that you have maintained your beliefs, despite being in such a terrible place. Upon hearing Matthew's words, Isaac caressed the cross hanging from his neck, and glanced down at it, then looked to Matthew. Like I said, everything happens for a reason. Such a vile and evil land requires the best of God's children to combat it. That's why I'm here, to act as God's hand, which holds onto the lantern which shall banish the dark back to the depths. And in doing so, I will liberate my wife from the clutches of the wicked. Even if it costs me my life, for she is what is most important to me. Isaac looked all about Matthew, as if he were trying to figure him out. And what is most important to Matthew Cooper? As Isaac asked, Matthew looked back at him, and responded without hesitation. My daughter, she's all I have left. She's somewhere out there, and I will not stop until I find her, and bring her back home. Safe and sound. Isaac gave Matthew a look of understanding and relation. Is she lost in the meadow? Matthew responded. No, she was taken, back on Earth. These hooded bastards stole her from me. Apparently she's special in some way, and need her for their fucked up ritual. Isaac's eye widened. Are you saying that your daughter is the prophecy child? As Isaac asked his question, the men all around turned their attention to him. The mentioning of the prophecy child seemed to have piqued their interest. Benjamin noticed this and saw the men begin to chatter. He stood up, and clanked his spoon against his bowl. Attention! The men all ceased their chatting, and turned their heads to Benjamin. Thank you. It seems that word has gotten out of a certain prophecy child. You are to keep this information to yourself. That means within this circle only. You will not go and spread the news among the others. It is of the utmost importance that we keep this to ourselves. The men all remained quiet, and some nodded their heads. This brings me to some news. Tomorrow morning we will all be deployed out on a hunting mission. We are all to bring back as much food as possible. I know the season is ending and the cold is approaching, but we cannot come home empty-handed. Meet me at the central hub at first light. That is all. With that, Benjamin sat back down, and continued his meal. The men all looked dismayed by the announcement. Carl chimed in with a question. Does that include me, Benji? This caused Benjamin to look at his friend with an unimpressed look. Yes, Carl, that includes you. We need you in case of any large game that decides to get too close for comfort. Carl nodded his head. Matthew turned back towards Isaac, to discover him staring intensely. It was clear that Isaac was interested in the details of Matthew's arrival. Matthew decided to address the questions himself. Look, all that matters is that Anna, my little girl, was taken from me. If you guys would be willing to help, I would be in your eternal debt. If any of you are fathers, then you understand the pain I'm in. I feel like I can't breathe, and all I want to do is see her. To make sure she's okay, to tell her that everything is okay. After a brief moment of silence, the men all pledged themselves to the cause. I'll help. Can't stand to see one more victim of this cruel world, said a man sitting across from Matthew. Thank you, and my daughter thanks you. What's your name? The man looked more like a kid, who couldn't have been more than 20 years old. The beginning of what may eventually sprout into a beard appeared on his face, with patches and all. He was a short and thin young man, with curly blonde hair. My name's Kurt. The kid possessed a very noticeable southern accent. Matthew leaned forward and extended his hand out, to shake the young man's hand. It's good to meet you, Kurt. You look young. I'm guessing you were born here. After releasing Matthew's hand, Kurt responded. Yes, sir, born and raised in this hole. Matthew looked around for any relatives nearby, but did not see any. Are your parents here too, Kurt? The young man's face now appeared sad from Matthew's question. Afraid not. My daddy succumbed to the flu a few winters back, and my mama. Kurt seemed to struggle finishing his sentence, and emotions began to show on his face. Isaac interjected. His mother found herself in the same hell as my wife, kidnapped by those sick bastards in the swamp, the horde herders. Matthew had no clue as to what Isaac was referring to. The horde herders? Questioned Matthew. Isaac's eyes became filled with hatred. Yes, you see, we are not the only survivors here on Hysteria. Dwelling in the deep of the putrid swamp are the delinquent scum. I wouldn't even spare them the pleasure of calling them human, for they've devolved beneath humanity. Benjamin leaned towards Matthew and placed his hand on his shoulder. Allow me to give you a history lesson, Matthew. You see, for thousands of years all of the survivors of Hysteria all lived here in the catacombs. We all existed in peace, helping one another and living off of the land. We would farm and hunt the local wildlife, far from the horrid horde beneath the meadow. It was a long and tranquil era. However, the good did not last forever. A great frost came, killing all of our crops, and driving most of the wildlife either to death or deep hibernation. Food became scarce, and the people were desperate. Most of us simply accepted that we would have to adjust to living from less, while some took another path. A Rouge group decided that they would venture out past the meadow in search of paradise. They did not find it, but instead more of the desolate frozen land. They became stranded, no longer able to return to the safety of the catacombs. Facing starvation, the men did the unthinkable. They hunted a beast of the horde, and fed upon its flesh. At first, there were no side effects or ailments from eating the tainted meat, so they continued to do so. What these men did not know, however, was that by consuming the flesh of the horde, they allowed the Dark Lord Amalgama direct access to their minds and souls. Through the DNA of the horde flesh, these men's thoughts began to be altered. Slowly, they all fell into madness. Their skin turned dark purple, and they began to bleed. Soon they had become corrupted by the cosmic horror, but kept their human form for the most part. It seemed that Amalgama decided they could serve its cause better by remaining somewhat human. For generations, these worshippers of Amalgama have fed upon horde flesh and reproduced. Their offspring born with the very same curse as them, with the Dark Lord's fingers on their souls from birth. They exist to serve its bidding. Also, through feeding upon the meat of the horde, they have somehow created a psychological connection to the beasts. It seems as if they have mastered the ability of telepathically communicating with the creatures. For centuries, they have guarded the bottom of the meadow, but never dared to enter it. That is until your arrival. Matthew was floored by the story, and remarked on the truly unfathomable nature of this world. Its oddities never seemed to cease, with a seemingly endless supply of horrid wonders. Isaac had his own point to add. However, they have on occasion dared to skim the outer reaches of the meadow. Which is how the sick fucks managed to steal my beloved Marissa. But I will rescue her one day, I swear it. Matthew could relate to Isaac's pain, or so he thought. I'm sorry to ask this, Isaac, but how is it that you're sure that she is still alive? Isaac looked into Matthew's eyes, with tears building up. You see, when the horde herders capture a man, they either kill him or torture him for a while, and then kill him. However, these psychos reserve an even crueler fate for any females unfortunate enough to be caught by them. Matthew instantly understood what Isaac was insinuating, and his jaw fell open in shock. The agony in Isaac's face was heartbreaking for Matthew. I'm so sorry, Isaac, that is so terrible. These monsters need to pay. Have you not all tried to rescue them? Kurt chimed in. There's too many of them, they outnumber us 3-1. And through eating the horde flesh, they've gained much more strength and speed than your average man. They're some tough sons of bitches, Matt. Benjamin wanted to give Matthew the full story, and continued where he left off. The strongest of them all being their leader, Charnan. I forgot to mention that through their lifestyle, the horde herders have gained a sort of eternal life. With the influence of amalgama coursing through their every fiber, their aging came to a halt. Charnan was once a man named Adam, and he lived here in the catacombs. He began to revolt, which led to the men leaving the meadows. He has managed to live for hundreds of years longer than any mortal man, as well as his followers. He is truly insane. Before Matthew could ask another question, Isaac burst out into anger, standing up and shouting among his peers. And his immortality will meet a swift end, in the form of my bow. I shall show him the same anguish that he has inflicted upon my wife for years. The men all cheered in unison, as Isaac stood in sorrow. In this moment, Matthew saw the torment on Isaac and Kurt's faces. These men had their loved ones stolen from him too. Matthew realized that he was not alone in the hopeless feeling within him. These men could sympathize to his dread, for they felt the same. Carl, how about a round of drinks? Benjamin requested this of his friend. Carl happily obliged and retrieved a large bottle from his bag. Kurt then began to pass out whiskey glasses among the men. Matthew inspected his glass, and noted on how old it appeared. He looked to Isaac. How old are these? Isaac looked to Matthew and smirked. As old as everything else here, whether it be our armor, swords, bows, or even everyday utensils, they all seem to date from the medieval era. Seems there was a massive influx of people to this world around that time. The very catacombs we sit in now was crafted around that time as well. Carl began to fill each glass with a small amount of brown liquid. Once everyone's glass had been dampened by the liquor, Carl raised his glass first. Everyone else followed in his footsteps. A toast to the old friends around me, and to the new friend sitting across from me. Carl's infectious smile met Matthew with a fleeting sense of happiness, for just a moment. Then before the men could drink, Isaac too raised his glass. And a toast to the victims of evil, may their vengeance be brighter than the sun, and banish the dark back to whence it came from. The men all raised their glasses once more, then downed the aged whiskey. Matthew was caught off guard by the abrasive flavor. He had been known to drink his fair share of whiskey in his younger days, but had never tasted something nearly as foul. Matthew's face could not hide his disdain, and Carl noticed. Not what you're used to, is it, Matty? This stuff's hundreds of years old, so the taste can take a little getting used to. Matthew nodded his head, with his face still squinting. The men all chatted along for a bit longer, before they all began to retire to their personal chambers. As last, Benjamin announced his departure. Come along, Matthew, I'll show you to your room. Carl, I will see you at first light. Matthew rose from his seat, and raised a parting wave to Carl. I'll see you then, good night, fellas. Carl remained in his seat, the last man by the fire. Matthew followed Benjamin down winding pathways, with dwindling light. They passed several large sections, with dozens of individual spaces for residents to make their own. Finally, Benjamin came to a stop beside one particular space. Well, this is yours. My wife and I's are straight across, over there. Benjamin pointed to the room directly adjacent to Matthew's. As the two men spoke, the sound of Amber's faint voice echoed. Benjamin, come to bed. Benjamin looked back towards his room, where his wife waited. Yes, dear, be there in a moment. Benjamin turned back towards Matthew. Try and get some rest, I want you to come with us on the hunt. Good night, Matthew. Benjamin patted Matthew on the shoulder, and retired to his room with his wife. Matthew then entered his space, and remarked at how cozy it appeared. It was a small space, which was to be expected, though it comprised of the necessary amenities. The bed was noticeably old, like everything else in this place, with an equally ancient-looking nightstand beside it, with a lit candle placed on top of it. Despite all of the astounding information, and the overwhelming grief with Matthew, he found himself to be absolutely drained of all energy. He knew that he would be at his best condition to help his daughter with ample rest. The man gently climbed into the bed, and struggled to find a comfortable position. Once he found a suitable spot, Matthew took a moment to calm his thoughts. He retrieved the photo of his family once again. The father and recently widowed husband gazed at the photo, and lost track of time. For to him it was not just a photograph, but a pathway to every memory he had shared with his girls. Matthew grieved for his wife, but knew that so long as the memories they shared stayed in his heart, that she would never truly be gone. He also knew that there would be a more befitting time to truly grieve, but it was not now. What was of the utmost importance was saving Anna from the malicious clutches. Only after she was safe would Matthew allow himself to break down. He carefully returned the aged photo to his wallet, and arched himself to extinguish the flame. The light vanquished from the space, and Matthew slipped into a deep slumber. The horde herders. Parker awoke from his forceful slumber, and found himself bound, slung over the back of a despicable beast. Atop the grotesque steed was the young warrior known as Dali. From what Parker could see from his vantage point, he was flanked by 2 riders behind him, and 2 in front. Leading the pack appeared to Gaston, the elder of the group. Parker began to recall the events that had led up to his moment, though the exact details remained a bit fuzzy. What was extremely vivid and noticeable, however, was the pulsing pain emanating from Parker's forehead. Then his most recent memory returned to him, in the form of Dali thumping Parker in the head with the blunt end of his spear. Parker looked up at the back of Dali's head, and longed for the opportunity to dish out his payback. Parker heard what sounded like wading through water. He looked down to discover that they were traveling through some sort of swamp land. This water glowed a menacing red color, and the liquid seemed slightly thicker than water. It resembled a sort of goo or pus. Parker noticed that his hands and feet were both heavily bound, making any attempt at escape likely futile. Though Park weighed his options, and considered what was waiting for him. He recalled the conversation earlier between Gaston and Dali, regarding a figure they referred to as Charnan. One part of this conversation in particular stuck out to Parker, a detail about how this Charnan would love to play with him because of his occupation. Parker had a good idea what that meant for him, and decided in that moment that he had no interest in meeting this Charnan. He began to quietly wiggle about in his position, to gauge just how much range of movement he had. His torso was the only part of his body that he could move effectively. Parker thought that if he could thrash about quickly enough, he might be able to roll himself off of the beast he found himself hitched to. After freeing himself from the ride, he had to think of what to do next. Parker considered immersing himself under the swampy water, concealing his location from the purple-faced warriors. It may be possible that if he did it swiftly enough, that they might not even notice Parker's disappearance. Parker knew that the chance of success was low, but to him it was better to at least take the chance, than to hand over his fate to his captors. Parker looked behind him and noticed that one of the 2 riders behind him appeared to be asleep, allowing his beast to follow the pack on his behalf. The other rider on the right had a sort of 1,000-mile stare about him, as if he weren't focused on the path before him. Parker decided that this was as good of an opportunity as any, and began to violently thrash about. Back and forth, the officer began to roll to the right, and then to the left. Back and forth he rotated, and quickly began to build up momentum. As Parker began to feel himself roll towards the back end of the beast's back, it took notice of his movement. Its revolting head turned back towards Parker, and snarled at him. Its guttural growl and foul breath stunned Parker. Then Dali reacted to the commotion, by turning back and gawking at Parker. He sneered and scowled at the bound prisoner. "Wake up, scum, we're almost home. Charnan is going to have some fun with you, and I can't wait to watch. Your screams will be music to my ears." Dali possessed a wicked smile on his face, and chuckled at the defenseless man behind him. Parker stared right back at Dali, and showed not 1 ounce of fear. "When this is all over, I'm going to kill you. I promise you that." Parker spoke with such certainty, which wiped the smile off of Dali's sadistic face. With a scowl, he turned back towards the path ahead. Parker looked the same way, and saw a massive rocky mountain in the distance. As they grew closer, Parker began to make out the details of the natural structure. There appeared to be a large entrance cut out in the mountain, with an enormous wooden gate in front of it. The red of the swampy water glowed and reflected onto the eerie dark entrance. Smoke floated upward from the gooey liquid, and cast the entire setting in an unsettling fog. Blue veins ran upward through the mountain, like most of the land of Hysteria. Parker arched his head up and was stunned to realize that he could not see the top of this mountain. Instead, it disappeared into the black night above them. What Parker could see, however, was a colossal symbol that was carved into the rock above the gateway. The pack finally reached the entrance, and came to a halt. All was still for a moment, then Gaston raised his fist up by his head. Soon the sound of rattling chains echoed out into the dimly lit swamp. The massive doorway began to slowly rise. Parker watched in disbelief as the 2-story high blockade elevated above the ground. Finally it locked into place, some 30 feet above the watery floor beneath. Gaston's hand lowered, and he and his goons began to enter. Though he would never admit it, fear began to enter Parker's body. The entranceway was pitch black, with nothing but the murky red water illuminating the pathway. As Dali passed under the gateway with a bound Parker on board his steed, the gate slowly began to lower behind them. The heavy chains hissed from Parker's rear, as he watched his only known escape disappear before his eyes. After some 50 feet or so of trudging through the shallow, thick swamp water, the ground beneath them began to elevate. Soon the pack found themselves out from the water, and onto dry land. The walls on each side were pure mountain rock, silver and seemingly metallic in material. It glistened as they passed by. Parker began to hear the faintest sound in the approaching distance. As they continued onward, the sound became more evident. It appeared to be the sound of screaming and shrieks of terror. It sounded as if someone were being murdered or tortured. Soon candle light greeted the returning travelers, as a sort of main lobby opened up. In this decrepit-looking space were more of the purple-faced cretins, seemingly excited by the men's return. They all began to cheer and snarl in glee at the sight of Gaston. They all happily ran their hands across his steed, as if they were petting it. They shrieked in joy. "Welcome back, Lord Gaston. Charnan patiently awaits your arrival in the throne room." Gaston nodded to his subjects, then waved his hand to dismiss them. They then moved on to Dali's steed. Dali was not nearly as friendly to the excited onlookers. "Touch my mount, and I will cut off your hands." The expression of excitement quickly vanished from their faces. Their faces turned menacing as they saw Parker for the first time, then they began to laugh in a wicked tone. One of them shouted, "Oh joy, Charnan will love this one." The freak followed the helpless Parker as they passed by, whispering in his ear, "He's gonna snap your bones, and slice off your skin, you filthy mutineer. Then when he's done with you, he'll feed you to us." The hysterical lunatics cackled as the pack exited the space. As they passed down another pathway, the haunting sound of agony grew louder and closer. An immense light loomed just around the rocky corner, as Parker laid his eyes on the approaching horror. Before him was a space as large as a football field, completely covered in yellow candlelight, and an ominous red hue all around. Parker and the others were walking across a sort of natural bridge, some 20 feet higher than the flat large plain beneath them. Parker looked on at the vast rugged landscape. Hundreds of the same purple-faced mutants lingered about, savagely devouring some sort of meat, along several meter-long tables. They all aggressively consumed this flesh, some of which even fought over chunks of the substance. The feral men sneered as they mindlessly consumed, drooling upon themselves. Along the far border of the room were a dozen or so large cages. These prison-like cages were about 10 feet high and approximately 20 feet long. They were decorated by a grand amount of rust about them. Within these cells appeared to be a sizable amount normal-looking human beings. These prisoners looked beyond petrified by their surroundings. Some looked to be sobbing uncontrollably, whilst others simply sat quietly. In the direct center of the massive space was a large wooden platform. On top of this platform were two of the savages, with an average human man knelt in front of them, facing away. The man was restrained to a large rock, with a rope running through a metallic buckle on top of it. The rope was tightly fastened around the man's hands, with very little extra left over. This forced the man to be rested with his chest up against the large boulder. The freaks took turns relentlessly whipping the man with old rusty chains. One after another, the mutants gleefully flung the metal chains at the helpless man's bare flesh. With every impact, another long gash cut down the man's back. He helplessly screeched out in unimaginable agony. The dealers of pain cackled in pure delight at the sight and sound of the poor soul's suffering. On the other side of the gigantic space was a very similar scene playing out, but with a woman instead. Parker could not bear to look, as the soulless cretins did unspeakable things the helpless woman. The sound of her desperate cries filled Parker with immense rage. He could not help but pity the woman, as he thought of his family. Soon some of these freaks managed to break from their feeding trance, and noticed the returning men as they crossed the land bridge above them. One after another, Parker witnessed hundreds of bloodshot eyes all looking at him, and the others. They all began to cheer and beat their chests in a form of celebration. The deviants began to chant Gaston's name, with such force that their combined voices began to shake the mountainous surroundings. Gaston did not gloat, but simply raised his hand up in acknowledgement. Then one of the freaks noticed the tied-up Parker on the back of Dali's steed, and began to shout, "Mutineer, may Charnon have no mercy." Parker felt immense fear and confusion all at once. Soon the party met the end of the land bridge, and disappeared out of the sight of the hundreds of cheering men below. The sound of their cheering persisted from behind them, slowly quieting as the pack continued onward. Parker could not fathom the unfiltered evil that he had just witnessed. Dali looked back at the gobsmacked officer. The young warrior harshly flung his elbow back, smashing into Parker's skull. As Parker rattled from the hateful attack, he looked into Dali's eyes with unlimited anger. Dali grinned back at the officer. "Prepare yourself, scum. Charnon's throne approaches." Parker looked ahead, and saw a long hallway. Decorating the corners of the hallway were small cages, barely large enough to house a human being. Some were empty, whilst others held the remains of the deceased's people. Of these remains, a few were complete skeletons, whilst others were in a repulsive mid-state of decomposition. The smell was indescribably heinous to Parker, as the unbearable odor met his nose. The offensive aroma filled the entire space, and began to overwhelm Parker's senses. Dali inhaled deeply, then released a satisfied sigh. "Ah, the sweet smell of dead mutineers, there is none better." Parker tried to hold his breath as long as possible, desperate to never have to inhale the repulsive odor again. Soon the gang met the end of the hallway. At the end was another massive door, with several guards on each side of it. Gaston along with the others came to a halt before the door. Parker watched as the Lord dismounted his horrid steed, and approached the guards. As Gaston grew near, the guards knelt down, and bowed their heads before him. Gaston turned back towards the others, and gestured towards Dali to dismount. As he did this, Darley aggressively threw Parker from the back of the mount. Parker crashed onto the hard mountainous ground, unable to lessen the blow. Then, in an excessive act of violence, Darley drove his foot into the diaphragm of Parker. The officer gasped out a horrific sound, as the air evacuated his lungs. Darley was amused by Parker's discomfort, as he cackled. As Darley stood above the helpless man, Gastoon shouted, "Darley!" The furious look in Gastoon's eyes caused Darley to wipe the smirk from his face. He quickly hoisted Parker up from off of the cold floor, and shoved him towards the door. Parker struggled to hobble his way towards Gastoon, with Darley pushing him forward. Then, as Parker reached the doorway, another warrior from Gastoon's pack grabbed hold of his right arm, while Darley snatched his left. Gastoon looked back at Darley with the same sinister demeanor. "You do not speak, unless spoken to. Do you understand?" Darley had the look of a lectured child on his face, and stubbornly refused to respond. Gastoon's eyes nearly popped out of his head, as he flung his hand out towards Darley. His hand clutched Darley's throat, and furiously squeezed. Parker watched as the veins in Gastoon's hand bulged, like the veins in Darley's face. After a few moments of struggle, Darley realized that he was at Gastoon's mercy. The Elder Lord looked down at the disobedient boy. "I will ask one more time, do you understand?" His eyes beamed down at the helpless young warrior, who begrudgingly nodded his head in agreement. "Good." With that word, Gastoon released his vice grip on Darley's throat, and proceeded to push open the massive doors. Before them was a 20-foot straightaway, which flowed into a staircase. Beyond the staircase stood a foreboding throne, constructed entirely from bones and flesh. Covering the entirety of this throne was the very same pus material that drooped from the horde's cursed flesh. Dwelling within this repulsive throne was a figure. This figure sat prominently, silently watching as Gastoon and his party approached. Parker observed the figure as they grew closer. His skin, like the others, glowed a similar purple hue. Though his seemed far more translucent than Gastoon's or Darley's, it was nearly see-through, revealing his veins just beneath the skin. As Parker came within 15 feet of the man, he could see that the veins were black as night, as if they were full of poison. The most prominent feature of the man, however, were his eyes. They were not a fiery red like the other warriors, but pitch black. His pupils were completely devoid of any light or color, though his gaze remained fixed on the returning men before him. In his left hand, the figure grasped the grip of a massive axe. This weapon's handle that led up to the head was comprised of some sort of vine that wrapped around it. The bit of the axe glimmered from a nearby candle, and appeared to be recently sharpened. Beside the large figure were two especially repulsive creatures, one of which resided on his left and right. They drooled and sat obediently by his side, ready to strike at his command. Gastoon and his followers trekked up the staircase, and continued towards the seated figure. Finally the party came to a halt, mere feet before the cursed throne. The stoic figure remained silent, as did Gastoon for quite some time. Then, after a long tense silence, Gastoon knelt down on one knee, and bowed his head. Darley and the other warrior holding on to Parker forced him down to the ground, mashing his face into the red rug beneath him. Then Darley and the others echoed Gastoon's posture. Parker struggled to look and witness the scene. For several seconds, the returning party remained silent, then Gastoon spoke. "Hail the eternal Charnan." His bass voice boomed out for all to hear. Then Darley and the others all repeated the words in sync with one another. After their praise, the throne room fell silent once more for some time. Then Charnan spoke, and the depth of his voice sent chills down Parker's spine. "Rise, Gastoon." The power of the man's voice caused the walls of the room to tremble. Gastoon obeyed and slowly rose back to his feet, to look upon his master. A grand sense of fear pervaded the ominous space. Charnan remained motionless, as he looked down at his subject. His eyes resembled a black hole, for no light would dare enter them. Charnan spoke once more. I trust you have brought me good news. Parker felt as the ground vibrated beneath him from Charnan's words. Dust speckled from the ancient ceiling way above them. Gastoon maintained eye contact with his master as he responded. I have my chieftain. The Horde have managed to pick up on the scent of the mutineers, just like you said they would. It seems that the meadow's concealing spell has lost its effectiveness. Gastoon grinned, as he delivered the promising news to his lord. Charnan did not grin, nor do anything at all. He simply remained motionless, then spoke. With the arrival of the prophecy child, our lord's influence over the land has grown stronger. With that, those who seek to defy it have lost their connection to Hysteria. This leaves the mutineers devoid of the protection they have depended on for a millennia. Charnan fell silent once more, and Gastoon to the moment to expand on his previous point. Yes, and with time I believe we will finally find where the rats have been hiding. Though the meadow is massive, chieftain, so there is no telling just how long it could take. Suddenly Charnan's demeanor changed, as his eyebrows angled downward and the edge of his lips curled in the same direction. Then his previously black abyss of eyes began to fill with a growing red ember. His eyes became so bright that area around him became illuminated in the red light. Parker watched as Gastoon's face showed a sign of concern for the first time since he had met him. Then Charnan hoisted the massive axe up from off the ground and sent its base crashing back onto the floor. The collision caused a disorienting boom that rivaled the volume of a gunshot. Parker could actually feel a shockwave brush over his body from the axe's impact. The enraged chieftain began to breath heavily but slowly, then he spoke. His voice carried an extra oomph of power and irritation. There can be no chance left, Gastoon. Our Lord has waited for hundreds of thousands of years for this. We cannot have these mutineers interfering. We must snuff them out, now. The walls rattled once more, as though even they feared Charnan's words. Parker watched as Gastoon noticeably gulped, showing immense intimidation. Then after a moment to compose himself, Gastoon responded to his infuriated master. Yes, my chieftain, I am sorry to displease you. We will head back out to the meadows at first light, with twice as many horde. We will find the rodents, I promise you. With no response from Charnan, Gastoon felt the need to praise his master further. I do have something that will please you, my lord. Dali, bring him to me. Gastoon looked back at Dali, and gestured for him to come forward. Dali and the other warrior briskly dragged Parker forward. Then once they stood shoulder to shoulder with Gastoon, they released their grasp on Parker. The young officer dropped down onto his knees, with his leaned back in exhaustion. Charnan's attention immediately fell upon Parker's wounded body. The chieftain leaned forward in his throne, and took a long careful look at the man. What do we have here? An officer of the law. His booming voice hurt Parker's ears at such a close distance. Officer Parker pained himself through each breath as he looked up at the intimidating figure before him. He made sure to show no intimidation to Charnan, and stared deep into his lifeless void of eyes. A tense stare down began, as neither man would break the line of sight. Charnan found this as a sign of disrespect, and his frustration was obvious on his face. He banged the hilt of his axe on the floor once again. This time, however, the impact carried an extra oomph of power behind it. Despite the disorienting force that emanated from the collision, Parker refused to break his stare. The young man went the extra step, and addressed Charnan directly. I'm sure that little trick makes everyone else piss their pants, but you're gonna have to try a bit harder with me, big guy. Parker smirked at the massive figure on the throne. Soon Charnan's displeased look morphed to one of slight amusement. He broke his stare with Parker, to address Gastoon. You have done very well, Gastoon. This one is strong-willed, my favorite type. He will do just fine. Gastoon smiled, pleased by his master's praise. Then Charnan's ominous gaze returned to Parker. A sickening smirk now resided on his face. "You're in luck, officer. The day has been long, and I have grown quite tired. Our fun will commence tomorrow morning. Take him to the holding cells. No one is to touch him before me. His screams are all mine." Parker's smirk quickly faded from his face, as two of Gaston's warriors grabbed a hold of his arms. As they began to drag him away, Parker's chest began to fill with dread. He feared that his refusal to show fear may have led him to a truly grim fate. As Parker was forcibly dragged out of Charnan's throne room, Gaston and his men remained in his presence. The seated master addressed his second-in-command. "The day we have waited for grows near, Gaston. In a few days, the mighty amalgama will be among us at last. Its cosmic might shall bless all that exists. We, the chosen few, will become one with its omnipotent wisdom. Then we shall achieve true eternal life, as masters of the universe. We will become part of its endless form, and our essence shall spread across all that has ever, or will ever be." Unfiltered joy spread across Charnan's face, as he spoke so highly of his true master. Gaston shared in Charnan's jovial bliss. Dali, however, did not. His expression seemed somewhat unimpressed, as Charnan took notice of this. Dali was stunned when he discovered Charnan's menacing gaze, and could feel a radiant hatred flowing from him. Feeling immense fear, Dali could not withstand the contact, and looked away. As he turned from his chieftain, Dali felt overwhelming anxiety at the sound of Charnan's voice. "Half-blood, I know you do not dare disrespect the cosmic blessing. Surely even you are not that ignorant." Dali timidly turned back towards the seated chieftain, and forced a nervous smile. "Of course not, Lord Charnan, I." As Dali began to address the chieftain, he was cut off. "You will kneel when speaking to me, half-blood." Dali instantly dropped to his knees and sunk his head low. "I apologize, my lord. I am so fortunate to exist in this time. To witness its arrival is the grandest of blessings." Sweat profusely ran down Dali's face, as he winced at the thought of Charnan's reaction. Charnan sat silently, and merely glared at the kneeling boy. "I find you half-bloods to be repulsive. If Amalgama did not find your numbers to be useful, I would slaughter every last one of you. The human part of you makes you weak and compassionate. There will be no room for that in the new world. It saddens me to know that I will have to share this new era with the likes of you. Then again, maybe fate will shine upon me, and you won't make it." Despite the vast hatred that Dali felt towards Charnan, the young man was wise enough to keep quiet. He simply remained in submission to his powerful overlord. "Now leave, half-blood, I tire of your odor." The hateful chieftain scowled at Dali as he hastily departed from Charnan's presence. Gaston felt displeased by his master's treatment of Dali. Charnan seemed to sense this, and addressed his second-in-command. "I have lived for over 1,000 years, Gaston. I have seen so much, and learned even more. I have watched kings of this land rise and fall, empires crumble before my eyes. Yet I cannot understand why it is that you watch over that boy." Gaston approached his master's throne, standing mere feet from Charnan. Gaston looked into the empty black eyes of Charnan, and spoke without hesitation. "Because I see in him what you cannot. He is young and foolhardy. He speaks out of turn, and acts impulsively. However, the boy possesses a combat ability that I have rarely ever seen. I have a feeling about him, Charnan. I believe that he is destined for something bigger than either of us. I cannot explain it, but something within me motivates me to push the boy and train him. Perhaps Amalgama itself has a divine purpose for Dali, one that you and I are blind to, for it is beyond us." The chieftain merely scoffed at Gaston's words, and instantly disregarded them. Then Charnan leaned forward, with his face mere inches from Gaston. "Do not dare be so bold as to speak for Amalgama. Only I possess the ability to hear the Eternal One directly. I know what our Lord's grand vision is, not you, Gastoon. You wish to play father for the half-blood, so be it. I will not stop you. But if you dare speak on the behalf of our Lord again, I will not hesitate to make an example of you. Now leave me, plan your search for tomorrow. Gastoon did not feel anger from Charnan's words, but disappointment. He had grown tired of his master's close-minded ways, and recalled a time when this was not the case. He lowered his head, and addressed his chieftain atop the throne. As you wish, master. Gastoon swiftly turned his back to Charnan, and marched down the hall. As he left his master's chambers, Gastoon found Dali perched against the wall. An irritated expression filled his face, and Gastoon understood. He reached out to his bold and brash underling. I know Charnan is not fond of you, Dali, but that is because he has yet to see your potential. Prove to him that you are more than just a half-blood, and show him that your genetics does not define you. Despite being half-human, you have managed to become the most promising warrior of your generation. Dali seemed unmoved by Gastoon's words, and continued to scowl. I have proven myself time and time again, master. I have personally captured more mutineers than any other warrior, even you. Why does he continue to deny me? Gastoon stepped closer to the young man, and spoke candidly. Perhaps it is not the amount of mutineers, Dali, but the individuals themselves. Perhaps you deliver the mutineer king, Ezra himself, to Charnan. Then he will have no choice but to acknowledge you. An intrigued look appeared on Dali's face. Gastoon managed to pique the young warrior's interest, and free him from his state of pessimism. He looked to Gastoon and nodded his head. I could do that, it would be easy, especially once we find where the rat's nest is. I could place the scum Ezra at Charnan's feet. Dali paused for a moment, and contemplated. Or maybe I grow tired of Charnan's disrespect, and usurp the old fool myself. Gastoon swiftly snatched Dali's armor plate in his hand, and shoved the young man into the wall with tremendous force. Dali's body smashed into the mountainous wall, which created an echoing thud. Dali attempted to push back, but Gastoon managed to maintain his upper hand. He placed his hand over Dali's mouth, and forced him to stay put. Gastoon looked his underling in the eyes with a fierce expression. Are you a fool? If anyone heard you say that other than me, Charnan would have your head on a pike within the hour. I have seen men attempt to usurp Charnan before. He killed them, and anyone who had the misfortune of even associating with them. Charnan will do anything to stay in power, that is why he has been our leader for centuries. He is our chieftain, and you will respect his word. Or you will die, like the rest. We are so close to the arrival of our cosmic Lord Dali, do not be foolish, or you will pay the consequences. Meet me at the gate at first light. After another moment, Gastoon released Dali from his grasp, and stormed down the corridor. Dali sulked in his anger, and lumbered back to his chambers. On the other side of the demented fortress, Parker struggled to free himself from his captors. Despite his best efforts, however, his bound body had no way to combat them. They continued to drag the helpless officer through the musky, dim pathways. Soon he found himself being dragged into the massive feeding grounds he witnessed earlier from the back of Dali's steed. Instead of being at the elevated land bridge from before, Parker was now on the ground floor, surrounded by hundreds of the repugnant horde herders. The crude purple-faced cretins cackled and pointed at Parker as he was dragged by them. Some even went so far as to kick the defenseless man as he went by. Soon chunks of rotten meat began to be hurled at Parker, smacking him all over his body. If the impact itself was not bad enough, the odor of rotting meat was repulsive. The impact of the decaying meat caused blood from it to cascade over Parker's face. The officer began to gag from the overwhelming stench. This caused the horde herders to roar out in laughter, as they continued to pelt him with the disgusting flesh. Finally, after a grueling trip through the feeding grounds, the two men released Parker. He looked around to see what was going on. Parker leaned his head back to see that he was located only a few feet from one of the large holding cells. One of the warriors was fiddling with the cell's door, whilst the other one stood beside Parker, glaring at him. Parker then looked in the other direction, and saw the perch from before. The man that was being mercilessly whipped earlier, now laid motionless against the massive boulder. He did not appear to be breathing, and his entire flesh resembled raw meat. It was beet red, and covered in raw wounds. In the other direction, Parker watched in horror as a helpless woman was being dragged by her ankle by two despicable creatures. She screamed in desperation, but there was nobody to help her, just as there was nobody to help Parker. She was powerless, and was at the mercy of these despicable individuals. Parker rolled over to see to the west. He could see a large group of horde herders ganged up in a circle. They all seemed to be watching some sort of event occurring in the center. The purple imbeciles walked away, revealing what had caught their attention. A helpless man found himself in a battle with one of the horde. This colossal humanoid beast eerily stalked the man, who was sobbing in a state of panic. He cowered on the ground with his hands up in front of his face. As the abhorrent brute closed in on the powerless soul, he begged and pleaded for his life. Then his words were hushed, as the appalling predator pounced on the weak man. The scene was gruesome, as the beast ravaged the man's flesh, ripping through his skin and muscles like paper. The grisly sight was too much for Parker to witness, as the man's body was mangled by the creature's razor-sharp teeth. He turned away, just in time to see the warrior finally manage to open the holding cell's door. He turned back towards Parker and approached. He knelt down to grab Parker by the head. The bold officer drove his forehead into the warrior's face with immense force. The warrior yelped in pain, as blood began to seep from both of his nostrils. He touched his hand to his face, and could see the blood. He sprinted towards Parker enraged, and sprung his foot directly into the officer's face. Parker's head violently crashed onto the rocky ground. Disoriented, he barely noticed as the two warriors kicked him several times, before dragging his corpse into the holding cell. They slammed the door behind them, and locked it. Still feeling disoriented from the blunt trauma to his skull, Parker tried to make sense of his surroundings. He attempted to sit up, but discovered his balance to be out of sync. His vision had become quite blurred from the attack, cloaking the full understanding of his surroundings. As he continued to struggle, Parker was surprised to feel the placing of a hand on his shoulder. This surprised Parker, and caused him to tense up defensively. "It's okay, I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe." The voice of a woman spoke into Parker's ear. He slowly let his guard down, and allowed his pulse to slow. Soon his blurred vision began to recede, and the face of a woman appeared before him. A middle-aged woman, brown and gray hair, looked down at Parker over his shoulder. She smiled at the bewildered police officer, which calmed him a bit. "Just try to relax, honey. I know this is all a lot to take in." The woman sported a noticeable southern twang to her voice, and her body language gave off a motherly vibe. Parker complied and accepted her advice. He relaxed his muscles and took a moment to scan the cell he found himself in. Within the rusty bars, Parker saw 3 people. Closest to him was the woman standing above him. Leaning against the bars some 10 feet away, was a man observing Parker with interest. Then at the opposing end of the holding cell, was a woman who was gazing at the outside area. "My name's Julie, what's yours, honey?" Parker broke away from observing his surroundings, and gave his attention to Julie. "Hi Julie, my name's Mike Parker, but you can just call me Parker." He reached his hand up and over his shoulder. Julie accepted his gesture and shook Parker's hand. "Okay Parker, well it's nice to meet you too. I wish we could have met in better circumstances." Parker nodded his head in agreement. He could not think of a worse situation for them to meet in. "This is Alan." Julie introduced Parker to the man sitting against the bars, and gestured towards him. Parker nodded to Alan, who did not reciprocate the gesture. He instead continued to gawk at Parker with intrigue. And over there is Marissa. Julie pointed to the woman looking outward. She did not move a muscle, as if she were in some sort of trance. Her face looked overtly melancholy, with a 1,000-yard stare. She looked quite lost and disconnected to Parker. He looked back up at Julie. How long have you been here? Julie squatted down so that her and Parker were at the same level. Well, that depends on what you mean by here. I arrived in Hysteria with my husband almost 20 years ago, soon after we found ourselves in the company of good people. We lived in. Julie paused and looked over at Alan, who seemed to take a keen interest in the conversation topic. Well, we lived with good people for years, in peace. We had a son and lived a good life for a long time. The men would routinely go hunting and scavenging for food and supplies. Being a bit of a tomgirl, I wanted to tag along. So I convinced the men to let me go hunting with them. Back on Earth, I was a pretty damn good bow hunter, so they welcomed me along with open arms. So for the next couple of years I'd go hunting with them, and we did damn good. Julie's happy demeanor changed, as the pitch in her voice grew somber. Then one day myself and 4 others were in the shallows of the meadow, admittedly way further from home than we were supposed to be. A gang of horde herders picked up our scent, and ambushed us. They killed all the men right in front of me, tied me up, and brought me here. I had a pretty good idea what they wanted with me, but fortunately I don't seem to be their type. At least, not yet, that is. I've been here for about 6 months. Parker was curious about these other people in Hysteria. So there's other survivors, like normal people? Julie nodded her head. Yes, but most newcomers to these lands get swept up by these animals before they can find other survivors. Parker wondered if Anna might be in these catacombs, or if she may be in this godforsaken place. Julie put the clues together. I'm guessing you just showed up, and have no idea what's going on. Am I right? Parker smiled at Julie, charmed by her intuition. You are correct, I am very confused. 1 minute I'm responding to a call of shots fired, then next thing I know I'm here. Wherever here is. So if you wouldn't mind filling me, that would be great. Before Julie could speak, Alan interjected from across the cage. You best be careful what you tell this one, Julie. I saw him come from the West Wing. The only thing in the West Wing, as far as I know, is Charnan's throne room. Julie had an annoyed and confused look on her face. So what, Alan? She questioned his reason for his statement. He responded with vigor. So, no survivors that go to Charnan's chambers ever come back. And look at him, he's barely got a scratch on him. I smell a rat. Alan was a man of maybe 40 years, who appeared to be of Italian descent, with jet black hair. He wielded heavy and prominent bags under his eyes, insinuating a severe lack of sleep for his body. Parker did not wait for Julie to respond, and decided to speak on his own behalf. Alan, right, look, I get that you don't know me, but I assure you that I am not working with these freaks. They tied my ass up and brought me here against my will. They presented me to Charnan like I was some kind of prize, and he seemed very excited to meet me, whatever that means. I got no idea what the hell is even going on, and I just want to get out of here, same as you, I assume. Alan chuckled as he shook his head. Then he looked at Parker with a smug expression. Kid, nobody gets out of here alive, and trust me, death is preferable compared to the shit they will do to you in here. I've seen things done to men that you couldn't even imagine. These sick fucks are creative, and treat torture like it's an art. We're just lucky there are so many victims here for them to choose from, but our day will come, sooner or later. Just ask poor Marissa over there. Alan pointed his thumb over his head at the distraught Marissa perched in the corner. Julie shouted at Alan, as she was deeply insulted by his behavior. Alan, how dare you? She has been through enough, you leave the poor girl alone. Despite her being the subject of conversation, Marissa remained catatonic, staring out into space. Instead of letting up, Alan decided to double down with his next statement. Hey, it's not my fault that she's their favorite piece of meat. His words sent Julie into shock, as she placed her hand before her gasping mouth. Her eyes spoke of anger and empathy, as Alan sat with a complete lack of care for how his words affected others. Without hesitation and despite his injuries, Parker sprung to his feet. He menacingly marched towards the sitting Alan with a distinct expression of rage. Alan's face on the contrary displayed an undeniable look of fear, as Parker closed in on him. As Parker reached the sitting man, he eagerly grabbed hold of Alan's ill-fitting clothes. The fit officer muscled the middle-aged man up and off of the ground with ease, then firmly pressed him back first against the caged wall. Initially, Alan attempted to struggle, but quickly realized that he was no physical match for Parker. He then relaxed himself, realizing that he was now at the younger man's mercy. Parker's fierce eyes stared down Alan, as he held the man against his will. I believe you owe these ladies an apology. Hearing Parker's words, Alan presented a smug look on his face. He said nothing for a moment, but instead reared his head back as far as possible, until it pressed into the cage behind him. Then Alan proceeded to spit the entire contents of his mouth directly into Parker's face. The slimy saliva covered the center of Parker's face, most notably his eyes and nose. Then the middle-aged man began to giggle, adding more insult to his heinous behavior. Then, as if he had not already done enough, Alan leaned in close to Parker's face and antagonized him further. Make me, pig, come on, show us some police brutality. As the nasty man breathed his mouth odor on Parker's face, the young man grew increasingly irate. He hearkened back to his training, and the lessons of self-control and the proper use of force. Though at the same time, Parker had flashbacks of the horrid bullies of his youth, and recalled just how satisfying it was once he shut him up. In his mind, Parker justified his upcoming reaction. He thought to himself how in this moment, he was not a police officer. He was in fact a man, trapped in a hellscape. He remembered the reason he became an officer of the law in the first place. To stand up for people, especially those who could not stand up for themselves. Then Parker snapped out of his trance, and returned to the present moment. Alan continued to laugh in his face, which had drool oozing down from it. Parker then dropped his right hand, releasing its grip on Alan's shirt. The hand then took the form of a fist, as Parker drove it into Alan's gut with the utmost force. In an instant, Alan's body became completely devoid of air. The middle-aged man let out a ghastly moan, as he fell uncontrollably into Parker. The young officer easily held Alan's weight, and pushed him back upward, smashing his back into the cell wall. As Alan struggled to breath, Parker addressed him once again. I said you owe them an apology, or do you need more convincing? Parker watched as Alan struggled to raise his pointer finger up, signifying that he was requesting a moment to collect himself. However, as Alan's middle finger was positioned inches from Parker's face, the hand rotated into a distinct middle finger. Though he could not speak, Alan found a way to remain defiant, as he stuck his trembling middle finger in Parker's face. You son of a bitch! Parker shouted as he reared back his balled-up fist once again. Parker, please stop. He's not worth it. Julie pleaded with Parker, standing mere feet behind him. Parker froze in place, holding off the overwhelming desire to strike Alan once again. He breathed heavily, as he felt his frustration begin to dissipate. Julie placed her hand on Parker's shoulder and spoke to him. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but let him go. Her soft tone calmed Parker down, as he loosened his grip on Alan's shirt. As he let Alan down, Parker maintained eye contact with his adversary. Julie spoke once again, this time to Alan. And Alan, don't you go antagonizing him again, 'cause next time, I'm not going to intervene. Alan said nothing, but maintained his disrespectful demeanor. Parker turned his back on the pitiful man, and walked away. Julie followed closely behind Parker, back to her section of the cage. Parker sat down and leaned up against the cage. Julie joined him, sitting right next to him with a smile on her face.